A woman who survived 3 years on the run. A warlord who rules through fear. One name spoken in a crowded street, and everything changes. This is the story of Lyra Hale, the fugitive who became a force no kingdom could ignore. When the most dangerous man in the realm dragged her from the shadows and demanded she face the past she'd been running from, she had two choices: disappear forever or stand and fight a battle that could destroy them both. Stay until the end to see how one woman's courage rewrote the fate of an entire kingdom. Drop a like and comment what city you're watching from. The rain came down in sheets over Black Hollow, turning the dirt streets into rivers of mud that sucked at boots and wagon wheels alike. It was the kind of rain that kept honest folk indoors and drove the dishonest deeper into the shadows, which was exactly why Lyra Hale preferred it. She moved through the marketplace with practiced efficiency, her hood pulled low, her steps deliberate but unhurried. 3 years of running had taught her that panic drew eyes. Confidence, even false confidence, kept you invisible. Black Hollow wasn't much. A frontier settlement where the kingdom's authority barely reached, where questions weren't asked and names weren't checked. The kind of place where a woman could work in a textile shop by day, sleep with a blade under her pillow by night, and never explain where she came from or why her hands sometimes shook when strangers got too close. She'd survived this long by trusting 3 rules: never stay anywhere longer than 6 months, never let anyone get close enough to matter, and never, ever let her guard down. Today, she was about to break all 3. Lyra reached the produce stall at the market's edge, the one run by old Merrick, a weathered man who asked no questions and expected the same courtesy in return. She was reaching for a bundle of root vegetables when the crowd went silent, not the natural quiet of conversation dying down, the unnatural primal silence that comes when prey senses a predator. Her hand froze, her pulse spiked. Every instinct she'd honed over 3 years of survival screamed at her to move, to run, to disappear into the nearest alley before whatever was coming arrived. But she'd hesitated half a second too long. The crowd parted like water around stone, and through the gap came 20 men on horseback. Not the ragtag frontier riders Black Hollow usually saw, but disciplined warriors in dark leather armor, rain streaming off their shoulders, weapons gleaming at their sides. They moved in formation, scanning the crowd with the cold efficiency of soldiers who'd done this 1,000 times. And at their center rode a man who made the rain itself seem to bend around him: Kyle Draven. Even here, hundreds of miles from the capital, everyone knew the name. The Alpha Sovereign, the warlord of the Northern Territories, the man who'd carved an empire from blood and steel and bent an entire region to his will through sheer, unrelenting force. He sat astride a massive black warhorse, his presence so commanding that people instinctively stepped back even though he hadn't spoken a word. His features were sharp and severe, like they'd been carved from granite. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, eyes the color of winter storms. A scar ran from his left temple to his cheekbone, a pale line that somehow made him look more dangerous, not less. He wore no crown, no royal regalia. He didn't need them. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge. Lyra's breath caught. She forced herself to turn slowly back to the vegetables, to keep her movements casual, unremarkable. Don't run. Runners get noticed. Blend in. Be forgettable. Search every building. Kael's voice cut through the rain, deep and authoritative. She's here. Lyra's blood turned to ice. She. Not someone. Not the fugitive. Not the witness. She. How? How had he found her? She'd been so careful. She'd changed her name, her appearance, her entire life. She'd left no trail, made no mistakes. Move! One of the soldiers barked at the crowd. Anyone hiding a fugitive will be charged with obstruction. Anyone who cooperates will be rewarded. Lyra's mind raced. The textile shop was 3 streets away. If she could make it there, grab her emergency pack, slip out the back before they reached it. You there! The voice was so close, so sudden, that Lyra's heart nearly stopped. She turned slowly and found herself staring up at one of Kael's soldiers, a broad-shouldered man with a scarred face and eyes that had seen too much death. Lower your hood, he commanded. Lyra's hand moved to her hood with agonizing slowness. Her mind screamed at her to run, to fight, to do something, but she was surrounded by armed men, and the crowd had backed away, leaving her exposed and alone. She pulled back her hood. The soldier studied her face, then glanced at a piece of parchment in his hand. A sketch, she realized with sinking dread. A sketch that looked enough like her old face that anyone paying attention would make the connection. "Sir," the soldier called out, his voice carrying across the market, "I think we found her." The crowd went completely silent. Cale Draven turned his horse, those storm-gray eyes sweeping across the market until they landed on her. For a moment he simply stared, and Lyra felt the weight of that gaze like a physical thing, assessing, calculating, utterly unreadable. Then he dismounted in one fluid motion and began walking toward her. Every instinct in Lyra's body screamed at her to run, but she was hemmed in by soldiers, by crowd, by the knowledge that running would only confirm what they suspected. So she stood her ground, lifted her chin, and met his eyes with a defiance she didn't feel. Kyle stopped 3 feet away. Up close, he was even more imposing, easily a head taller than her, built like a warrior who'd earned every scar on his body. "What's your name?" he asked. His voice was quieter now, but no less commanding. "Mara Voss?" Lyra lied smoothly. It was the name she'd been using in Black Hollow, the one on her work papers, the one she answered to every day. "I work at the textile shop on Copper Street. I don't know what you're looking for, but I haven't done anything wrong." "Mara Voss?" Cale repeated, as if tasting the name. His expression didn't change. Interesting, because 3 years ago, a woman named Lyra Hale witnessed a murder, a brutal killing of a merchant in the capital, and then she vanished before she could testify. The blood drained from Lyra's face. "That merchant was my cousin," Kyle continued, his voice dropping to something almost dangerous. "And the man who killed him is still walking free because the only witness disappeared. So I'm going to ask you again, and I suggest you answer truthfully this time." He took one step closer. The crowd seemed to hold its breath. "What is your name?" Lyra's mind raced. She could keep lying, but he clearly didn't believe her, and if she pushed too hard, he'd simply arrest her and sort it out later. She could try to run, but she'd seen how fast his soldiers moved, and she wouldn't make it 10 feet. Or she could tell the truth and face the nightmare she'd been running from for 3 years. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, keeping her voice steady. "You have the wrong person." Kyle's jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he might simply have her dragged away, but instead he reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. He opened it and withdrew something that made Lyra's heart stop. A silver necklace. Delicate, with a small pendant shaped like a bird in flight. Her necklace. The one she'd lost the night of the murder, when she'd fled the scene in blind terror. "This was found at the scene," Kyle said quietly. "It has an inscription on the back. To Lyra, may you always find your way home. From your father, I'm told. He died 6 years ago." Tears burned behind Lyra's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She stared at the necklace, the last piece of her old life, the one she'd thought was gone forever. "The woman who owned this," Cale continued, "saw Lord Casimir Wolfe murder my cousin in cold blood. She ran before she could testify, and without her testimony, Wolfe walked free. He spent the last 3 years consolidating power, silencing witnesses, buying off judges. He's built an empire on blood and fear, and he's untouchable, because the one person who can prove what he did has been hiding." He took another step forward, close enough now that Lyra could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes. "I don't care what name you're using," he said, his voice low and intense. "I don't care where you've been or why you ran, but I know who you are, Lyra Hale, and I need you to come with me." "And if I refuse?" Lyra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Cale's expression didn't change. "Then I'll arrest you for obstruction of justice and drag you back to the Capitol in chains. Your choice." The crowd around them had pressed closer, drawn by the drama unfolding in their midst. Lyra could feel their eyes on her, could hear the whispers starting, fugitive, witness, murderer, and she knew that even if she somehow escaped Cale Draven today, her cover in Black Hollow was blown. She'd have to run again, start over again, live in fear again. And she was so tired of running. "I want to speak with you," Lyra said finally. "Alone." Cale studied her for a long moment, then nodded. He turned to his soldiers. "Clear the area. Give us space." The soldiers moved to push the crowd back, creating a bubble of privacy in the middle of the rain-soaked market. When they were far enough away that their conversation wouldn't be overheard, Lyra spoke. "If I'm who you think I am," she said carefully, "then you know why I ran. The man who killed your cousin, Casimir Wolf, he's one of the most powerful nobles in the kingdom. He has money, influence, connections. He made it very clear what would happen to anyone who testified against him." "He threatened you," Kyle said. It wasn't a question. "He sent men to my home the night after it happened," Lyra said, her voice tight with old fear. "They said if I spoke to the authorities, they'd kill everyone I loved. My mother, my younger brother, my friends. And then they'd make sure I died slowly." She met Kale's eyes. "So I ran. I left everything behind, changed my name, and I've been moving from town to town ever since, always looking over my shoulder, always waiting for someone to recognize me." "Your family?" Kale asked. "Safe," Lyra said. "I made sure they thought I was dead, faked my own drowning, left enough evidence that they'd believe it. As far as they know, I died 3 years ago." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. It was the only way to keep them safe. Kale was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. "And now?" "Now you've found me," Lyra said bitterly. "And Wolf's men will hear about it within the week. So it doesn't matter what I do. I'm already dead." "Not if you're under my protection," Kyle said. Lyra let out a harsh laugh. "Your protection? You're powerful, I'll give you that. But Casimir Wolf doesn't play by the rules. He has assassins, spies, allies in every corner of the kingdom. Even if you lock me in the most secure fortress in the realm, he'll find a way to get to me." "Then it's a good thing," Kyle said, his voice taking on an edge of steel, "that I don't play by the rules either." Something in his tone made Lyra pause. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't expected in those storm-gray eyes. Determination. And beneath it, something that looked almost like pain. "Your cousin," Lyra said slowly. "You were close." Kale's jaw tightened. "Brennan was more than my cousin. He was my closest friend, my brother in all but blood. And Wolf killed him over a trade dispute, shot him in the back like a coward, and walked away because no one had the courage to stand against him." "I'm sorry," Lyra said, and meant it. "I don't want your sympathy," Kyle said. "I want your testimony. Help me bring Wolf to justice, and I swear on everything I hold sacred that I will keep you safe." "You can't promise that," Lyra said. "I can," Kyle said, "and I will. But I need you to trust me." "Trust?" Lyra shook her head. "I haven't trusted anyone in 3 years. Trust gets you killed." "So does running," Kale countered. "How much longer do you think you can keep this up? Another year? 2? Eventually you'll make a mistake. Eventually someone will recognize you. And when they do, Wolf won't give you a chance to explain. He'll just make you disappear." He was right. And Lyra hated that he was right. She'd known for months now that her luck was running out. Every new town felt less safe than the last. Every stranger's glance felt like a threat. She was exhausted, paranoid, barely sleeping, living in a cage of her own making. "If I agree to this," Lyra said slowly, "I want guarantees. Real ones. Not just promises." Kyle raised an eyebrow, in Matson. "Such as?" "If I testify and Wolf walks anyway, if your justice system fails, I want safe passage out of the kingdom. New identity, new life, enough money to start over somewhere he can't reach." "Done," Kale said without hesitation. "And if something happens to me, if Wolf's men get to me before the trial, I want you to swear that you'll protect my family, that you'll make sure they stay hidden and safe." Kael's expression softened slightly. "You have my word. Your family will be protected whether you survive this or not." Lyra searched his face, looking for any sign of deception, any hint that this was a trap. But all she saw was grim sincerity and a determination that matched her own exhaustion. She was so tired of running, so tired of being afraid. And somewhere buried beneath 3 years of survival instinct and paranoia was the woman she used to be, the one who believed in justice, who thought the truth mattered, who wouldn't have hesitated to do the right thing. Maybe it was time to remember who that woman was. "All right," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her gut. "I'll testify. But we do this on my terms, not yours." Kyle's eyes narrowed. "Explain." I'm not going to be dragged to the capital like a prisoner, Lyra said. I'll come willingly, but I want to be treated as a witness, not a fugitive. I want my own quarters, not a cell. And I want updates about the investigation, about Wolf's movements, about any threats against me. No secrets, no surprises. You're in no position to make demands, one of Kael's soldiers called out, stepping closer. Kael held up a hand, silencing the man without looking at him. His eyes stayed locked on Lyra's. Anything else? He asked, a hint of what might have been amusement in his voice. Yes, Lyra said. I want that necklace back. It's mine. For the first time since he'd arrived, Kael's expression shifted, something almost like respect flickering across his features. He held out the necklace, letting it dangle from his fingers. Lyra took it, her hands trembling slightly as she fastened it around her neck. The weight of it felt both foreign and familiar, like stepping back into a life she'd thought was gone forever. We leave within the hour, Kael said. Gather what you need. My men will escort you. I don't need an hour, Lyra said. Everything I own fits in one bag. I've gotten good at traveling light. She saw something shift in Kael's expression. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. He knew what it was like to carry your entire life on your back, to be ready to run at a moment's notice. Then let's not waste time, he said. The longer we stay here, the more likely someone reports our location to Wolf. He was right. Every second they stood in the open market was a second closer to danger. Lyra nodded and turned toward Copper Street, toward the textile shop and the tiny room above it where she'd been sleeping for the past 4 months. 2 of Kael's soldiers fell into step beside her, not quite guarding her, but not quite letting her walk free either. The shop owner, a nervous woman named Essa, was standing in the doorway when Lyra arrived. Her eyes went wide at the sight of the soldiers. Mara, what's happening? Are you in trouble? I have to leave, Lyra said simply. I'm sorry, Essa. You've been good to me. But don't ask questions, Lyra interrupted gently. It's safer that way, for both of us. She climbed the narrow stairs to her room, the soldiers waiting below. The space was barely large enough for a bed and a trunk, but it had been hers, and she'd felt almost safe here. Almost. She pulled her emergency pack from beneath the floorboards, a worn leather bag containing a change of clothes, what little money she'd saved, a knife, and a small bundle of herbs she'd been collecting for medicinal purposes. Everything else, the few pieces of clothing hanging on pegs, the cracked mirror, the threadbare blanket, belonged to someone named Mara Voss. Lyra Hale didn't need them anymore. She descended the stairs to find Kael waiting outside, his expression impatient. Ready? He asked. As I'll ever be, Lyra said. The ride out of Black Hollow felt surreal. The townspeople lined the streets, watching in silence as Kael's soldiers rode past. Lyra could feel their stares, their judgment, their fear. Tomorrow, they'd be telling stories about the fugitive who'd been hiding among them, the woman who'd brought the Alpha Sovereign to their doorstep. She didn't look back. They rode hard for 3 hours before Kael called a halt at a roadside way station. It was a small, fortified structure, the kind of place where travelers could rest without fear of bandits, or worse. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth. Kael's men secured the perimeter while Lyra sank onto a bench, exhaustion hitting her all at once. She hadn't realized how much energy it took to maintain a false identity, to constantly look over your shoulder, to never fully relax. Now that she'd made her choice, some of that tension had released, but in its place came a deeper, more primal fear. She'd agreed to testify against one of the most dangerous men in the kingdom. She'd painted a target on her back that no amount of running could remove. Kael sat down across from her, 2 cups of something hot in his hands. He slid one across the table. Drink, he said. It's been a long day. Lyra wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the warmth seep into her frozen fingers. She took a sip, some kind of spiced tea, strong and bitter. You're afraid, Kael observed. Of course I'm afraid, Lyra said. I've spent 3 years being afraid. It's become a habit. Of fear can be useful, Kael said. It keeps you sharp, keeps you alive, but it can also paralyze you, make you second-guess yourself when you need to act. Is that what happened to you? Lyra asked, the question coming out before she could stop it. When your cousin was killed, did fear paralyze you? Kael's expression went very still. For a moment, Lyra thought she'd crossed a line, that he'd shut down or lash out. But instead, he took a slow sip of his tea and spoke. "I wasn't there when Brennan died," he said quietly. "I was 300 miles away, dealing with a border skirmish. By the time I got the message, he was already buried, and Wolf was already spreading lies about what happened, that it was self-defense, that Brennan attacked first, that the witnesses were unreliable." "But you knew the truth," Lyra said. "I knew Brennan," Kael said. "He was gentle, thoughtful, the opposite of a fighter. He wouldn't have attacked anyone. But without proof, without a witness willing to stand up in court, there was nothing I could do. And that—" He paused, his jaw tight. "That was worse than fear. That was helplessness." Lyra understood that feeling all too well. She'd felt it the night she witnessed the murder, the night she realized that telling the truth could get her killed. "So you spent 3 years looking for me," she said. "I spent 3 years building a case," Kael corrected. "Gathering evidence, tracking down associates, following the money trail. But every lead came back to the same thing. I needed the witness. I needed you." "And now you have me," Lyra said. "So what happens next?" "We ride to my fortress in the Northern Territories," Kael said. "It's the most secure location I control. From there, we prepare your testimony and petition the High Court for a trial. How long will that take?" "Weeks, at minimum, maybe months. Wolf has powerful allies. They'll fight every step of the process." "And in the meantime?" Lyra asked. "In the meantime," Kael said, his voice hardening, "you stay alive. Because the moment Wolf finds out you've resurfaced, he'll send every assassin in his employ to silence you before you can testify." A chill ran down Lyra's spine. "Comforting." "I'm not here to comfort you," Kael said bluntly. "I'm here to tell you the truth. This is going to be dangerous. There will be attempts on your life. But if you trust me, if you follow my lead, we'll get through this." "Trust," Lyra repeated, the word tasting foreign. "You keep using that word like it's simple." "It's not simple," Kael agreed, "but it's necessary. Can you do that? Can you trust me?" Lyra met his eyes across the table. There was no softness in them, no false promises or empty reassurances. Just grim determination and an intensity that suggested he'd burn down the entire kingdom if that's what it took to get justice for his cousin. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was something close. "I can try," she said. Kael nodded, as if that was all he'd expected. "Then get some rest. We ride at dawn." That night, Lyra lay on a rough cot in a corner of the way station, listening to the sounds of Kael's soldiers keeping watch. She should have felt safer, surrounded by armed men, sheltered behind locked doors, under the protection of the most powerful warlord in the realm. But old habits died hard. She kept her knife within reach, slept in her clothes, and woke at every sound. Once, in the darkest part of the night, she woke to find Kael standing by the window, silhouetted against the moonlight. He wasn't looking at her. His gaze was fixed on the darkness outside, vigilant and unyielding. For a moment, she wondered what it must be like to carry that kind of responsibility. To be the person everyone looked to for protection, for justice, for strength. Then he turned, and his eyes met hers across the room. Neither of them spoke. But in that shared moment of wakefulness and worry, something shifted, a silent acknowledgement that they were both in this together, whether they wanted to be or not. Lyra closed her eyes and, for the first time in 3 years, let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to face this alone. Outside, the rain had stopped. Dawn was still hours away. And somewhere in the capital, a powerful man named Casimir Wolf was about to learn that the witness he'd thought was dead had just resurfaced and was coming for him. The game had changed. The hunter had become the hunted. And Lyra Hale, the woman who'd refused to be found, was about to make herself impossible to ignore. The fortress of Ironhold rose from the northern mountains like a fist of black stone, defiant against the snow-laden peaks that surrounded it. Lyra had seen fortifications before, ramshackle border walls, merchant strongholds, even the distant silhouette of the capital's palace. But nothing like this. Ironhold wasn't just built for defense. It was built to withstand sieges, to endure wars, to outlast kingdoms. And for the next several weeks, possibly months, it would be her cage. The journey north had taken 5 days of hard riding through increasingly hostile terrain. They'd switched horses twice, avoided main roads, and stopped only when absolutely necessary. Kael's soldiers moved with military precision, rotating watch shifts, checking supply lines, scanning every ridge and tree line for threats. Lyra had watched them work with a mixture of admiration and unease. These weren't ceremonial guards or hired muscle. They were warriors who'd seen real combat, and they treated her protection like a military operation, which meant they also treated her like a valuable asset, not a person, not someone with opinions or agency, an asset to be moved, guarded, and delivered intact. She'd tried to talk to Kael during the journey, but he'd been distant, focused, his attention constantly split between the road ahead and the shadows behind. The few times they did speak, it was tactical. How far to the next waypoint, whether she needed to rest, if she'd noticed anything suspicious. Nothing personal. Nothing that acknowledged the fragile alliance they'd formed in Black Hollow. Now, as they passed through Ironhold's massive iron gates, Lyra felt the weight of those walls closing around her. The courtyard was enormous, filled with soldiers drilling in formation, blacksmiths hammering at forges, messengers running between buildings. Everything moved with purpose, with order, with the kind of discipline that came from absolute authority. Kael dismounted and immediately began issuing orders to his commanders. Lyra slid off her horse, her legs stiff from days of riding, and stood awkwardly to the side as men rushed past her, barely acknowledging her presence. "This way," a voice said. Lyra turned to find a woman in her 40s approaching, tall, lean, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. She wore practical leather armor and moved with the confidence of someone who'd earned their rank through skill, not politics. "I'm Captain Thorne," the woman said. "I'll be overseeing your security detail." "My what?" "Your security detail," Thorne repeated, as if it were obvious. "You'll have guards posted outside your quarters at all times. You don't go anywhere without an escort. You don't speak to anyone without clearance. And if I give you an order, you follow it immediately. Understood?" Lyra bristled. "I'm not a prisoner." "No," Thorne agreed, her tone flat. "You're worse. You're a liability. And my job is to make sure that liability doesn't get herself killed before she's useful." The words stung, but Lyra forced herself to stay calm. "Where's Kael?" "The Sovereign is busy. You'll be briefed when he's ready. I want to speak with him. Now." Thorne's expression didn't change. "That's not how this works. You're under his protection, which means you follow the chain of command. Right now, that's me. So unless you'd like to spend the next few weeks locked in your quarters with no contact with anyone, I suggest you cooperate." Lyra's hands clenched into fists. Every instinct screamed at her to push back, to refuse, to demand better treatment. But she was exhausted, outnumbered, and surrounded by people who saw her as nothing more than a means to an end. "Fine," she said through gritted teeth. "Show me where I'm staying." Thorne led her through a maze of corridors, past training halls and armories, until they reached a section of the fortress that felt almost residential. The captain stopped at a heavy wooden door, unlocked it, and pushed it open. "Your quarters," she said. "Meals will be delivered. If you need anything, tell the guards. Don't try to leave without clearance." Lyra stepped inside. The room was sparse but functional. A bed, a desk, a wash basin, a small fireplace already burning. A single window looked out over the mountains, too narrow to climb through, too high to jump from. The door closed behind her with a heavy thud, and she heard the lock click into place. She was alone. Lyra sank onto the bed, her body finally releasing the tension it had been holding for days. She wanted to scream, to cry, to throw something at the wall. Instead, she sat in silence, staring at the fire, and wondered if she'd made the worst mistake of her life. Hours passed. No one came. No food, no updates, nothing. Just as the light outside began to fade, the lock clicked. Lyra tensed, her hand instinctively reaching for the knife she kept in her boot. But it wasn't an assassin. It was Kael. He stepped inside, closed the door behind him, and leaned against it with a weariness that surprised her. Up close, in the firelight, she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. He looked like a man carrying the weight of a war. "I know you're angry," he said before she could speak. "You locked me in," Lyra said, her voice tight. "You promised I wouldn't be treated like a prisoner." "You're not locked in for punishment," Kael said. "You're locked in for protection. 2 hours ago I received word that Casimir Wolf knows you've resurfaced. He's already put a bounty on your head, 50,000 gold pieces to anyone who delivers you to him, dead or alive. The blood drained from Lyra's face. 50,000, that's enough to make kings desperate, Kael interrupted. And it means that every assassin, bounty hunter, and opportunist in the kingdom is now looking for you. So yes, you're locked in, because the alternative is you stepping outside and getting a knife in your back within the hour. Lyra stood, pacing to the window. This is what I was afraid of. This is why I ran in the first place. And running didn't save you, Kael said. It just delayed the inevitable. At least now you have a chance to fight back. Do I? Lyra turned to face him. Or am I just bait? A way to draw Wolf out so you can get your revenge? Kael's expression hardened. You think I'd risk your life for revenge? I think you'd risk anything to get justice for your cousin, Lyra shot back. You've made that very clear. For a moment, they stood in tense silence, the air between them crackling with unspoken accusations. Then Kael moved to the desk, pulled out a chair, and sat down heavily. You're right, he said quietly. I do want justice. I want Wolf to pay for what he did. But I'm not stupid enough to think revenge alone will achieve that. If this were just about vengeance, I could have sent assassins years ago. I could have started a war. But I didn't. Because what I want, what Brennan would have wanted, is for Wolf to face public trial, to be exposed for what he is, to lose everything the same way he took everything from us. He looked up at her, and there was something raw in his expression. And that only works if you survive long enough to testify. So no, you're not bait. You're the key to everything, which is why I will do whatever it takes to keep you alive, even if you hate me for it. Lyra searched his face, looking for deception, for manipulation. But all she saw was exhaustion and determination and something that looked almost like regret. She sat down on the edge of the bed. What happens now? Now we prepare, Kael said. I've already sent a formal petition to the High Court requesting a trial. It'll take time. Wolf will fight it, delay it, try to bury it in legal maneuvering. But eventually, they'll have to grant it. And when they do, you'll need to be ready. Ready how? Your testimony needs to be airtight, Kael said. Every detail, every moment of what you saw that night. Wolf's lawyers will tear apart any inconsistency, any gap in your memory. So we're going to go through it, over and over, until you can recount it in your sleep. I already see it in my sleep, Lyra said bitterly. I've been seeing it for 3 years. Then we use that, Kael said. We turn your nightmares into evidence. Over the next 2 weeks, Lyra's life fell into a grueling routine. Every morning, Captain Thorne escorted her to a secure chamber deep in the fortress where Kael and his legal advisors waited. They would sit for hours, going through her testimony line by line, questioning every detail, challenging every memory. What time did the murder occur? What was the lighting like? How far away were you? What did Wolf say exactly? What was he wearing? What weapon did he use? How many shots? Where did Brennan fall? On and on until Lyra's head pounded and her voice grew hoarse. Some days she wanted to scream at them to stop, to leave her alone, to let the memories rest. But she forced herself to keep going, to relive that night over and over because she knew it was necessary. Because she knew that if she faltered even once in court, Wolf would walk free. But the interrogations weren't the worst part. The worst part was the isolation. Kael had been right about the bounty. Within days, assassination attempts began. The first came from a kitchen servant who'd been bribed to poison Lyra's food. Captain Thorne caught her before the tainted meal was delivered. The second was a guard who tried to smother Lyra in her sleep. He'd gotten as far as her doorway before another guard noticed his unusual behavior and raised the alarm. After that, the security tightened even further. Lyra's food was tested by official tasters. Her room was inspected 3 times a day. She was forbidden from speaking to anyone except Kael, Thorne, and the legal team. The fortress, which had felt like a cage, now felt like a tomb. She spent her evenings staring out the window at the mountains, watching the snow fall, and wondering if she'd ever breathe free air again. The isolation gnawed at her. She'd spent 3 years alone, yes, but that had been her choice. She'd been able to walk through markets, talk to shopkeepers, feel the sun on her face. Now, even that small freedom was gone. One night, 3 weeks into her confinement, Lyra heard raised voices outside her door. She moved closer, pressing her ear to the wood. Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. That was Thorne. She's going to lose her mind if we keep her locked up like this. Kale's voice, frustrated. She needs air, needs to move, needs something other than these four walls. Then she can lose her mind, Thorne said flatly. Better that than lose her life. There has to be a middle ground. There isn't. Not with a 50,000 gold bounty on her head. Silence. Then Kale spoke again, quieter this time. I'll take responsibility. Post double guards, clear the training yard, but let her out for an hour. Just an hour. If something happens, it won't, Kale said, his voice hard. I'll be with her myself. The next morning, when Captain Thorne unlocked Lyra's door, Kale stood behind her. Get your cloak, he said. You're coming with me. Lyra didn't question it. She grabbed her cloak and followed him through the corridors, flanked by 6 heavily armed guards. They emerged into the fortress's inner training yard, a wide open space surrounded by high walls. Snow dusted the ground, and the morning air was sharp and cold. Lyra stopped, closed her eyes, and breathed deeply. The air tasted like freedom. You have an hour, Kale said. Walk, run. Do whatever you need to do. Just stay within the walls. Lyra didn't waste time thanking him. She simply started walking, her boots crunching through the snow, her face turned up to the weak winter sun. It felt like emerging from a cave after months of darkness. Kale walked beside her in silence, his presence both reassuring and unsettling. The guards maintained a perimeter, visible but not intrusive. How much longer? Lyra asked after a while. Until the trial? At least another month, maybe more. I don't know if I can do this for another month, Lyra admitted. The isolation, the constant fear, the feeling like I'm just waiting to die. You're not going to die, Kale said firmly. You don't know that. Yes, I do. He stopped walking, turned to face her. Because I won't let it happen. I've lost too many people already. I'm not losing you too. The words hung between them, unexpected and honest. Lyra stared at him, seeing past the warlord, past the authority, to the man beneath, someone who'd been shaped by loss just as much as she had. Why do you care? She asked quietly. Beyond the testimony, beyond the trial, why do you actually care what happens to me? Kale was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low. Because you remind me of Brennan. He was kind, thoughtful, tried to see the good in people even when the world gave him every reason not to. And when he saw injustice, he spoke up, even when it was dangerous, even when it cost him. He met her eyes. You could have stayed hidden. You could have let Wolf get away with murder, but you didn't. And that takes a kind of courage that's rare. Or stupidity, Lyra said. Maybe both, Kale allowed, a hint of a smile touching his lips. But I'd rather have a courageous fool on my side than a wise coward. Before Lyra could respond, Captain Thorne appeared at the edge of the yard, her expression grim. Sovereign, she called. We have a problem. Kale's hand went immediately to his sword. What kind of problem? A messenger just arrived from the capital. The High Court has granted Wolf's request for a preliminary hearing. They want to question the witness, verify her credibility before committing to a full trial. When? Kale demanded. 2 weeks, Thorne said, in the capital, and they're requiring her presence in person. No written statements, no depositions. She has to appear before the magistrates herself. Lyra's stomach dropped. The capital? That's a death trap, Kale finished. Wolf's home territory, surrounded by his allies, his guards, his assassins. They might as well be asking us to hand her over. Can we refuse? Lyra asked. We can try, Thorne said. But if we do, they'll dismiss the case for lack of cooperation. Wolf walks. Kale swore viciously. This is Wolf's doing. He's manipulated the court, called in favors, set this up perfectly. If we go, Lyra's exposed. If we don't go, we lose everything. Then we don't have a choice, Lyra said, her voice steadier than she felt. We go. Both Kyle and Thorne turned to stare at her. Absolutely not, Kale said. It's suicide. It's necessary, Lyra countered. You said it yourself. Without me, there's no case. So if the court wants to see me, they get to see me. But I'm not going as a frightened witness begging for protection. She lifted her chin, meeting Kyle's eyes with determination she didn't entirely feel. I'm going as someone who has nothing left to lose and everything to say. You're talking about walking into enemy territory with a target on your back. I've had a target on my back for 3 years, Lyra interrupted. At least this time I won't be alone. Kyle studied her, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to Thorn. Double the escort. I want 50 men, not 20. We travel with full battle readiness, and we secure every building, every street, every rooftop between the courthouse and our accommodations. That'll be seen as a provocation, Thorn warned. I don't care, Kyle said. If they want her testimony badly enough to summon her to the capital, they can deal with the security measures that come with it. Thorn nodded and strode away, already barking orders to nearby soldiers. Lyra watched her go, then looked back at Kyle. This is what Wolf wanted, isn't it? To draw me out of hiding, get me somewhere he can reach me. Probably, Kyle admitted, but we don't have a choice. If we refuse, we lose. If we go, at least we have a chance. A chance to what? Survive long enough to testify? A chance to expose him, Kyle said, to show the entire kingdom what kind of man Casimir Wolf really is. And once that happens, all the money and power in the world won't save him. 2 weeks. Lyra had 2 weeks to prepare for the most dangerous journey of her life. 2 weeks to decide if she was brave enough to walk into the lion's den and stare down the man who'd haunted her nightmares for 3 years. The training intensified. Kyle brought in combat instructors who taught her how to fall, how to protect vital areas, how to recognize danger signs. Captain Thorn drilled her on escape routes, safe words, emergency protocols. The legal team rehearsed her testimony until she could recite it backward. But beneath all the preparation, beneath the strategic planning and security measures, was a simple, terrifying truth. No amount of training could guarantee her survival once they left Ironhold's walls. The night before their departure, Lyra couldn't sleep. She paced her room, her mind racing through every possible scenario, every way this could go wrong. Finally, unable to stand the confinement any longer, she tried the door. It was unlocked. She stepped into the corridor, half expecting guards to stop her, but the hallway was empty. Cautiously, she made her way through the fortress, following the sound of voices until she reached a balcony overlooking the main courtyard. Below, soldiers were loading supply wagons, checking weapons, preparing horses. The entire fortress was mobilizing for tomorrow's journey. It looked less like a legal proceeding and more like a military campaign. Can't sleep either? Lyra spun to find Kyle standing in the shadows at the far end of the balcony. He wasn't in armor, just a simple shirt and trousers, and without all the military trappings, he looked younger, more human. I keep thinking about all the ways this could go wrong, Lyra admitted. So do I, Kyle said. He moved to the balcony railing, standing beside her. I've run through 100 scenarios, posted guards on every approach, planned for every contingency I can think of, and I'm still not convinced it's enough. Then why are we doing this? Because sometimes, Kyle said quietly, doing the right thing means accepting that you can't control every outcome. You can only control your choices. He looked at her. You chose to testify. I chose to protect you. And tomorrow, we both live with the consequences of those choices. What if I'm not strong enough? Lyra asked, the words escaping before she could stop them. What if I get up there and freeze? What if I see Wolf and remember what he threatened and I... You won't, Kyle said with absolute certainty. How can you possibly know that? Because you've already survived worse, Kyle said. You survived witnessing a murder. You survived 3 years on the run. You survived coming forward when every instinct told you to stay hidden. Someone that strong doesn't break when it matters most. Lyra wanted to believe him, but fear had its claws deep in her chest, whispering all the ways she could fail. I need to tell you something, she said abruptly. In case tomorrow goes badly, in case I don't... Don't, Kyle interrupted. Don't talk like that. I need to say this, Lyra insisted. My family, my mother and brother, they're in a small village called Greenbrook, about 200 miles south of the capital. They think I'm dead. If something happens to me, if Wolf's men find them, I'll protect them, Kale said. I gave you my word, and I keep my promises. Even if I'm not alive to hold you to it? Especially then, Kale said. His voice was rough with emotion. I failed Brennan. I wasn't there when he needed me. But I won't fail you or them. You have my word. Lyra felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Why are you doing this? Really? Is it just about justice, or is it something more? Cale was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Brennan used to say that the measure of a person wasn't how they wielded power, but what they did when they had the chance to protect someone powerless. He believed that strength without compassion was just cruelty with a crown. He turned to look at her. I've spent my whole life building power, commanding armies, ruling through strength. But what's the point of all that if I can't use it to protect someone who deserves protection? I'm not powerless, Lyra said softly. No, Cale agreed. You're not. But you deserve someone in your corner anyway. They stood in silence, looking out over the courtyard, watching the soldiers prepare for tomorrow's journey. In the distance, the mountains loomed dark against the starlit sky, beautiful and dangerous and unforgiving. Whatever happens tomorrow, Lyra said, thank you for giving me a chance to fight back, for making me believe that standing up might actually matter. Cale reached out and, very gently, placed his hand over hers on the railing. It does matter. And tomorrow, we're going to prove it. The journey to the capital took 3 days of tense, heavily guarded travel. They moved like an army on the march, scouts ahead, soldiers flanking, supplies protected. Every night, they camped in secured locations with triple watch rotations. Every morning, Cale personally inspected Lyra's food before allowing her to eat. And every mile closer to the capital, Lyra felt the noose tightening. The city appeared on the horizon at midday on the third day, a sprawling metropolis of white stone and gleaming towers, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Lyra had been born there, had lived most of her life within those walls. But now, seeing it again after 3 years, it felt like staring at the mouth of a beast. They entered through the northern gate, and immediately Lyra felt the weight of hostile eyes. People lined the streets, watching the procession with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. News of the hearing had spread, and everyone knew why the Alpha Sovereign had brought an army to the capital. Whispers followed them through the streets. That's her. The witness. She's the one accusing Lord Wolf. 50,000 gold for her head. Cale rode beside Lyra's carriage, his presence a silent declaration of protection. But even his authority couldn't stop the muttered threats, the hostile stares, the sense that they were surrounded by enemies. They reached the courthouse just as the sun began to set, a massive building of marble and iron that represented the kingdom's justice system. Tomorrow, Lyra would walk through those doors and face the magistrates. And Casimir Wolf. That night, in a heavily guarded suite of rooms secured by Cale's men, Lyra stood at the window and looked out over the city she'd once called home. Somewhere out there, Wolf was preparing his defense, bribing officials, positioning assassins, and tomorrow she would face him. A knock at the door made her turn. Cale entered, his expression grim. "We have a problem," he said. Of course they did. "The magistrates have changed the format," Cale continued. "Instead of a private preliminary hearing, they're making it public. Open courtroom, press allowed. Anyone who wants to attend can watch." Lyra's stomach dropped. Public? But that means anyone with a bounty on their head and a weapon can walk right in, Cale finished. "It's a trap. Wolf's setting you up to be killed in front of witnesses, and he'll claim it was just an overzealous citizen seeking justice." "Can we object?" "We did. They overruled us. Said transparency was essential for such a serious accusation." Lyra sank into a chair, her mind racing. A public hearing meant hundreds of people, any one of whom could be an assassin. It meant chaos, confusion, perfect conditions for an attack. "We don't go," Cale said. "We withdraw, regroup, find another way." "There is no other way," Lyra said. "You said it yourself. If we don't cooperate, we lose, and Wolf wins." "Better that than you dead." Lyra stood, moved to face him. 3 years ago, I ran because I was afraid, and I've been running ever since. Tomorrow, I stop running. Tomorrow, I stand up in front of the entire kingdom and I tell the truth. And if someone tries to kill me for it, she took a breath. Then at least I'll die fighting, not hiding. Cale's expression was anguished. "You're asking me to walk you into an execution." "I'm asking you to trust me," Lyra said, "the same way you asked me to trust you. They stared at each other, the weight of tomorrow hanging between them like a blade. Finally, Kael nodded. Then we go in prepared for war. Every guard I have, every precaution we can take. And if anyone, makes a move toward you, they're dead before they take a second breath. Agreed, Lyra said. Kael moved to leave, then stopped at the door. Lyra, don't, she said softly. Don't say goodbye. Not yet. He nodded and left without another word. Lyra returned to the window, watching the city lights flicker in the darkness. Tomorrow, she would walk into that courthouse and face her demons. Tomorrow, she would look Casimir Wolf in the eye and speak the words that could bring him down. And if she survived, if they both survived, maybe, just maybe, they could finally stop running and start living. But first, she had to make it through the night. Sleep, when it finally came, was shallow and broken. Lyra dreamed of courtrooms that turned into execution chambers, of Casimir Wolf's cold smile as assassins closed in from every shadow. She woke before dawn, her heart pounding, her sheets damp with sweat. The hearing was scheduled for mid-morning. 4 hours. She had 4 hours to prepare herself to walk into the most dangerous room in the kingdom. Captain Thorne arrived with breakfast, tested, approved, and still utterly unappetizing. Lyra forced herself to eat anyway. She'd learned long ago that fear was easier to manage on a full stomach. The Sovereign wants to see you, Thorne said as Lyra finished. In the strategy room. Now. The strategy room turned out to be a converted dining hall filled with maps, guard rosters, and diagrams of the courthouse. Kael stood at the center, surrounded by his commanders, his expression carved from stone. He looked up as Lyra entered. We have a new development. Of course we do, Lyra said, her voice tight. Kael gestured to one of his men, who spread a detailed floor plan across the table. The magistrates have assigned seating. You'll be positioned here. He pointed to a raised platform at the front. Elevated, visible, from every angle in the room. Wolf will be seated here, directly across from you, maybe 20 feet away. Lyra's stomach clenched. 20 feet. Close enough to see every detail of his face, close enough to hear his voice without amplification. Our guards will be positioned along these walls, Kael continued, tracing lines on the map. But courthouse protocol forbids weapons inside the main chamber. We can post armed men outside, but once you're in there, you'll be surrounded by unarmed civilians and a handful of court bailiffs who may or may not be loyal to Wolf. So I'm defenseless, Lyra said. Not defenseless, Kael corrected. Just exposed. There's a difference? Kael's jaw tightened. We'll have plainclothes guards mixed into the crowd. If anyone makes a move, they'll respond. But they'll have to get through the crowd first, which means there's a window, maybe 3-4 seconds, where you'll be vulnerable. 4 seconds, Lyra repeated. That's how long I have before someone puts a blade in my ribs. We won't let it get that far, Captain Thorne said. You can't promise that, Lyra said, meeting her eyes. None of you can. We all know this is a setup. Wolf is going to try something, and when he does, there's no guarantee your men will reach me in time. The room fell silent. No one argued, because they all knew she was right. Kael moved around the table until he stood directly in front of her. Then we cancel. We don't go. We've already had this conversation, and I'm having it again, Kael interrupted, his voice rough with barely controlled emotion. I won't watch you walk into an execution because of some abstract idea of justice. It's not worth your life. It's not abstract to me, Lyra said. Your cousin died because Wolf thought he was above consequences. How many others has he hurt? How many people has he silenced or threatened or destroyed because no one had the courage to stand up to him? She took a breath. If I don't do this, he wins. And he keeps winning, and people keep dying. Better them than you, Kael said bluntly. The words hung in the air, shocking in their honesty. Lyra stared at him, seeing the conflict in his eyes. The warlord who'd built an empire on strategic thinking, warring with the man who'd lost too many people he cared about. You don't mean that, she said softly. Don't I? Kael's voice was low, dangerous. You think I care about strangers more than I care about... He stopped himself, the words catching in his throat. The room was utterly silent. Every soldier suddenly found something fascinating to look at on the floor. Then you care about what? Lyra prompted, her heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. Kael's expression shifted. Frustration, vulnerability, something raw and unguarded. About keeping my promises. About not failing another person I've sworn to protect. It wasn't what he'd been about to say, and they both knew it. But before Lyra could press further, a commotion erupted from the hallway outside. Captain Thorne was out the door in an instant, her hand on her sword. Kael followed, and Lyra rushed after them despite the protests of the guards. In the corridor, two of Kael's soldiers had a man pinned against the wall, a courier in official court livery, his face pale with terror. "What's going on?" Kael demanded. "He was trying to deliver this to the witnesses' quarters," one of the soldiers said, holding up a sealed envelope, "but he wouldn't identify who sent it." "It's from Lord Wolf," the courier stammered. He said it was important she read it before the hearing." Every muscle in Kael's body went rigid. "Give it to me." The soldier handed over the envelope. Kael broke the seal and pulled out a single sheet of expensive parchment. His expression went from anger to something far more dangerous as he read. "What does it say?" Lyra asked. Kael crushed the letter in his fist. "It's a threat. To your family." The world tilted. "What?" Kael handed her the crumpled paper, his expression murderous. Lyra smoothed it out with shaking hands and read, "Miss Hale, I trust this message finds you well. I wanted to personally inform you that I've recently become acquainted with your mother and brother. Lovely people. They live such a quiet life in Greenbrook, don't they? Your mother still tends that small garden behind the cottage. Your brother, what's his name? Finn? He's grown quite strong. Helps out at the mill now. It would be a shame if anything were to happen to them. Accidents are so common in small villages. House fires, bandit raids, tragic disappearances. I hope you'll make the right choice today. C.W." The letter slipped from Lyra's fingers, her vision blurred, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Wolf knew. He'd found them. He had people watching her family right now, waiting for his order to breathe. Kael's voice cut through her panic. His hands were on her shoulders, steady and grounding. "Lyra, breathe. Look at me." She forced her eyes to focus on his face. "I sent men to Greenbrook 2 weeks ago," Kael said. "The day we left Ironhold. 20 of my best soldiers disguised as merchants and travelers. Your family is under protection, and they don't even know it. Wolf's men are watching an empty house." The panic receded slightly, replaced by confusion. "You what?" "Did you really think I'd leave them unprotected?" Kael said. "I told you I keep my promises." "But how did you even know where—" Lyra stopped, understanding dawning. "You've known their location this whole time." "I've known a lot of things," Kael said. "I spent 3 years tracking you down. Did you really think I wouldn't find your family in the process?" His expression softened. "But I also knew that if I told you I'd found them, you might panic, might try to contact them and blow their cover, so I protected them quietly. And now they're safe, in a secure location, with guards who will die before they let Wolf's men anywhere near them." Lyra felt tears burning her eyes, relief, gratitude, and something else she couldn't quite name. "You should have told me." "Probably," Kael agreed, "but I was more concerned with keeping them alive than with your feelings about my methods." Despite everything, despite the fear and the tension and the danger, Lyra almost laughed. "You really are insufferable sometimes." "So I've been told," Kael said. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, then vanished. He turned to the courier. "Tell your employer that his message was received, and tell him that if any harm comes to that family, I will personally raze his estate to the ground and salt the earth where it stood." The courier nodded frantically and fled the moment the soldiers released him. Kael turned back to Lyra. "This changes things. Wolf is desperate. He's playing every card he has, which means he knows his position is weak. He's trying to scare you into silence because he's afraid of what you'll say." "Good," Lyra said, her voice hardening. "He should be afraid." 2 hours later, they approached the courthouse. The streets were packed with people. Nobles in fine silks, merchants in their best clothes, commoners craning for a glimpse of the spectacle. News of the hearing had spread like wildfire, and it seemed like half the capital had turned out to watch. Lyra rode in a closed carriage surrounded by Kael's soldiers. Through the curtained windows, she could hear the crowd, some shouting support, others hurling insults. "Justice for Lord Wolf! Death to false witnesses! Make her pay!" Captain Thorne rode alongside the carriage, her hand never leaving her sword hilt. "Stay close to me when we get inside," she said through the window. "Don't stop for anyone. Don't respond to anyone. Just keep moving." The carriage stopped at the courthouse steps. The crowd pressed closer, held back by a thin line of city guards who looked overwhelmed and underprepared. Kyle dismounted first, his presence alone forcing the nearest spectators back a few steps. He opened the carriage door himself and offered Lyra his hand. She took it, stepping down into a wall of noise and hostility. People surged forward, shouting questions, accusations, threats. The city guards struggled to hold them back. "Move!" Captain Thorne barked, her soldiers forming a protective wedge around Lyra. They pushed through the crowd, up the courthouse steps, toward the massive bronze doors. Something flew through the air. A rock, Lyra realized half a second before it would have struck her temple. Kale's hand shot out, catching it mid-flight, his reflexes inhumanly fast. He crushed it in his fist and let the fragments fall, his expression promising violence to anyone who tried that again. They made it inside. The doors slammed shut behind them, muffling the crowd's roar. The courthouse interior was all marble and echoing space, designed to intimidate. Magistrates' clerks hurried past, barely sparing them a glance. A bailiff approached, a thin man with nervous eyes. "The hearing chamber is this way," he said. "The magistrates are already assembled. We're just waiting for me, I presume?" The voice came from behind them, smooth and cultured and dripping with false courtesy. Lyra's entire body went rigid. She turned slowly, and there he was. Casimir Wolf. He was exactly as she remembered, tall, elegant, with silver-streaked dark hair and the kind of refined features that belonged in portrait galleries. He wore expensive clothes, moved with aristocratic grace, and smiled like someone who'd never faced a consequence in his life. But Lyra remembered what was beneath that polished exterior. She remembered the cold rage in his eyes when he'd shot Brennan. She remembered the casual cruelty in his voice when he'd threatened her family. "Miss Hale," Wolf said, inclining his head as if they were meeting at a garden party. "What a pleasure to finally meet you formally. I've heard so much about you." Kale stepped between them, his body language pure threat. "You're not to speak to her." "I'm not speaking to her," Wolf said mildly. "I'm simply greeting a fellow participant in today's proceedings. Surely that's not against protocol." He looked past Kyle to Lyra. "I do hope you received my letter. I wanted to make sure you understood the stakes of today's testimony." "The only thing I understand," Lyra said, finding her voice, "is that you're a murderer who's finally going to face justice." Wolf's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Justice is such a flexible concept, don't you think? Especially when it relies on the word of a fugitive against the reputation of a respected lord. He glanced at Kyle. "No offense to your vendetta, Sovereign, but even you must see how this looks. A woman with everything to gain from lying, testifying against a man she's never even met before the alleged incident." "I was there," Lyra said. "I saw you kill him." "Did you?" Wolf's tone was conversational, almost friendly. "Or did you see something in the dark, from a distance, and convince yourself it was me? Memory is so unreliable, especially under stress." "The hearing chamber is ready," the bailiff interrupted, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation happening in his courthouse. Wolf straightened his coat. "Then let's not keep justice waiting, shall we?" He walked past them toward the chamber doors, his entourage of lawyers and assistants following like well-trained dogs. Kale turned to Lyra, his expression fierce. "You don't have to do this. We can still walk away." "No," Lyra said, "we can't." The hearing chamber was enormous, with vaulted ceilings and rows of benches packed with spectators. At the far end sat 3 magistrates behind an elevated bench, 2 men and a woman, all wearing the black robes of the high court. They looked stern, impartial, and utterly unmoved by the drama unfolding before them. Captain Thorne led Lyra to the witness platform, exactly where Kyle's map had shown, elevated and exposed. She climbed the 3 steps and took her seat, feeling hundreds of eyes on her. Wolf sat across from her, flanked by his legal team, looking relaxed and confident. He caught her eye and smiled. Kyle positioned himself in the front row, directly in Lyra's line of sight. His expression said what his words couldn't: "I'm here, you're not alone." The head magistrate, a severe woman with iron-gray hair, called the chamber to order. The crowd quieted. "This is a preliminary hearing," she announced, her voice carrying across the chamber. "The purpose is to assess the credibility of the witness and determine if sufficient evidence exists to proceed to a full trial. Miss Lyra Hale, you stand accused of making false statements and wasting the court's time. Lord Casimir Wolfe stands accused of murder. We will hear testimony, examine evidence, and render a judgment on whether this matter deserves further investigation." She looked directly at Lyra. "Miss Hale, you may begin your testimony." Lyra stood, her hands gripping the platform's edge to keep them from shaking. The chamber was silent except for the scratch of court scribes' pens. She took a breath and began. 3 years ago, on the night of the 15th day of the 6th month, I witnessed Lord Casimir Wolfe murder a man named Brennan Ashford in cold blood. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The magistrates remained impassive. "I was working late at the merchant quarter, closing up the textile shop where I was employed," Lyra continued. "It was past midnight. I heard raised voices from the alley behind the building, 2 men arguing. I looked out the window and saw Lord Wolfe and Brennan Ashford facing each other." "And you're certain it was Lord Wolfe?" one of the magistrates asked. "Yes," Lyra said. "There were lamps lit in the alley. I saw his face clearly. He was wearing a dark coat with silver buttons. He had a ring on his right hand, a family crest. I recognized him because I'd seen him before at public events." Wolfe's lead attorney stood. "Objection. The witness is describing events from 3 years ago in poor lighting, under stressful conditions. This is hardly reliable." "The witness will continue," the head magistrate said. "You'll have your opportunity to cross-examine." Lyra forced herself to keep going. They were arguing about a trade agreement. Brennan said Wolfe had violated the terms, that he'd brought illegal goods through Brennan's warehouse without authorization. Wolfe told him to forget what he'd seen. Brennan refused. He said he'd report it to the Trade Commission. The memory was so vivid now, playing out in her mind like it had happened yesterday instead of 3 years ago. "Wolfe pulled out a pistol," Lyra said, her voice steadying. "Brennan tried to back away, tried to reason with him, but Wolfe shot him, once in the chest. Brennan fell, and Wolfe—" Her voice cracked slightly. "Wolfe stood over him and fired twice more, to make sure he was dead." The chamber erupted in whispers. The magistrates called for order. "And what did you do then?" the head magistrate asked. "I ran," Lyra said honestly. "I was terrified. I knew if Wolfe saw me I'd be next, so I grabbed my things and ran. I made it maybe 3 blocks before I realized I'd lost my necklace. It must have fallen when I fled the shop. I didn't dare go back for it." "The necklace that was found at the scene," the magistrate said, consulting her notes. "The one with your name engraved on it." "Yes." Wolfe's attorney stood again. "The necklace proves nothing except that Miss Hale was in the area at some point. It doesn't prove she witnessed the alleged murder. It doesn't even prove a murder occurred at all." "Brennan Ashford is dead," Kyle said from the audience, his voice cutting across the chamber. "That's not alleged. That's fact." "Sovereign Draven," the head magistrate said sharply. "You will refrain from outbursts or I will have you removed." Kale inclined his head, but his eyes promised he was far from done. The questioning continued for over an hour. Wolfe's attorneys attacked every detail of Lyra's story: the lighting, the distance, her memory, her motives. They painted her as an opportunist, someone seeking reward money or fame or revenge for some imagined slight. Through it all, Lyra held her ground. She answered every question clearly, admitted when she wasn't certain, refused to be bullied or intimidated. Then Wolfe's lead attorney went for the throat. "Miss Hale, isn't it true that you disappeared because you were wanted for theft? That you stole from your employer and fled to avoid prosecution?" "No," Lyra said. "Then why run? Why not go to the authorities immediately?" "Because Lord Wolfe sent men to my home that very night," Lyra said. "They threatened to kill my family if I testified, so I faked my death and disappeared to protect them." "Convenient," the attorney said. "No witnesses to this alleged threat. No proof it ever happened. Just your word against Lord Wolfe's reputation." "My word is the truth," Lyra said. The attorney smiled. "The truth according to a woman who's been living under false identities, running from town to town, surviving by deception. Why should this court believe anything you say?" Before Lyra could answer, chaos erupted. A man in the back of the chamber stood suddenly, his hand emerging from his coat with a pistol. "For Lord Wolf!" he screamed. Everything happened at once. Cale was moving before anyone else processed the threat, vaulting over the bench separating him from the witness platform. Captain Thorne's guards surged forward. The crowd panicked, people shoving and screaming. The gunman fired. The shot went wide, the bullet striking the wall behind Lyra's head. Kyle reached her platform just as the man aimed again. He threw himself in front of Lyra, his body shielding hers, as two more shots rang out. Then Captain Thorne was there, her blade finding the gunman's throat with lethal precision. He dropped, blood pooling on the marble floor. The chamber descended into pandemonium. People fled for the exits. The magistrates demanded order. More of Kyle's men flooded in, weapons drawn despite protocol, securing the room. Lyra couldn't move. Cale was pressed against her, his weight pinning her to the platform. She could feel his heart pounding, could smell gunpowder and fear. "Are you hit?" she gasped. "No," Cale said. "Are you?" "I don't think so." He pulled back just enough to check her for injuries, his hands running over her arms, her shoulders, searching for blood. Finding none, he cupped her face, his expression raw with relief and rage. "This ends now," he said. He turned to the magistrates, who were still trying to restore order. "That was an assassination attempt, in your courtroom, during official proceedings, and I'm willing to bet that man," he pointed to the dead gunman, "has connections to Wolf." "That's absurd," Wolf's attorney sputtered. "Lord Wolf had nothing to do with—" "Search the body," Kyle commanded his soldiers. "Find out who he is." They did, and what they found silenced the entire chamber. "His name is Garrick Voss," Captain Thorne announced, holding up papers taken from the dead man's coat. "He's employed by the Wolf estate, has been for 6 years, security detail." Every eye in the chamber turned to Wolf. For the first time, his composure cracked. "I have dozens of employees. I can't be held responsible for the actions of every—" "He was carrying this," Thorne interrupted, holding up a sealed letter. She broke it open and read aloud. "Mission sanctioned. Target, the witness. Payment upon completion. Signed with Lord Wolf's personal seal." The chamber exploded. Even the magistrates couldn't maintain order now. Wolf's attorneys were shouting objections, the crowd was screaming for his arrest, and Wolf himself had gone deathly pale. "This is a fabrication," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Someone planted—" "Enough," the head magistrate said, her voice like a whip crack. "Lord Casimir Wolf, you are hereby detained pending investigation into conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, and attempted assassination of a court witness." "You can't do this," Wolf said, his aristocratic mask shattering. "Do you know who I am? Do you know what kind of power I wield?" "I know exactly what you are," the magistrate said coldly. "Bailiffs, take him into custody." Wolf's attorneys tried to intervene, but Kyle's soldiers were faster. They surrounded Wolf, disarmed his guards, and locked manacles around his wrists. As they dragged him toward the chamber doors, Wolf locked eyes with Lyra. All pretense of civility was gone. His expression was pure hatred. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You think putting me in chains changes anything? I have allies you can't imagine, resources beyond your comprehension. I will destroy you. I will destroy everyone you've ever—" Kyle's fist connected with Wolf's jaw, cutting off the threat mid-sentence. The Lord crumpled, unconscious before he hit the floor. "Take him to the cells," Kale ordered. "Maximum security. No visitors without my explicit approval." The soldiers hauled Wolf's limp body away. The crowd was still in chaos, but the magistrates had regained control. "This hearing is adjourned," the head magistrate announced. "We will reconvene in 3 days to determine the next steps. Miss Hale, you remain under court protection. Sovereign Draven, I trust you'll ensure her safety." "With my life," Kyle said. They made it out of the courthouse through a side entrance, avoiding the mob still gathered at the front. Lyra's legs threatened to give out, adrenaline finally wearing off, leaving her shaking and exhausted. Kyle caught her before she fell, lifting her into his arms despite her protests. "I can walk. Let me do this," Kyle said quietly. "Just let me make sure you're safe." She stopped arguing. They returned to their secured quarters under heavy guard. Once inside, Kyle set Lyra down gently on a couch, then immediately began pacing like a caged predator. That was too close, he said. If that shot had been better aimed, if I'd been 1 second slower. But you weren't, Lyra said. You saved my life. I almost got you killed, KL countered. I brought you here knowing it was dangerous, and He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. This was a mistake, all of it. It wasn't, Lyra said firmly. Wolf showed his hand. He tried to have me killed in open court, and now everyone knows what he is. The magistrates saw it, the crowd saw it. He can't hide behind his reputation anymore. At what cost? Kael demanded. You were almost murdered today. What happens tomorrow? Or the next day? Wolf has allies, resources. Even in chains, he's dangerous. So we finish this, Lyra said. We push for a full trial. We bring all his crimes into the light. We make sure he never hurts anyone again. Kyle stared at her, something like awe in his expression. After everything that just happened, you still want to fight? I'm done running, Lyra said. From Wolf, from my past, from everything. 3 years ago, I let fear control my life. Not anymore. She stood, moved to where Kyle was standing. You asked me to trust you. Now I'm asking you to trust me. Trust that I can do this. Trust that I'm strong enough. Kale reached out, his hand gentle as it cupped her cheek. I've never doubted your strength. He swallowed hard. I'm terrified of losing you. The words hung between them, honest and vulnerable, and charged with meaning neither of them had fully acknowledged until now. You're not going to lose me, Lyra said softly. You can't promise that. Neither can you, Lyra said. But we're in this together, and together we're going to win. For a moment, Kael just looked at her, his expression conflicted. Then he leaned down and pressed his forehead to hers, his breath warm against her skin. Together, he said quietly. They stood like that for a long moment, finding strength in each other's presence. Outside, the city continued its chaos. Wolf sat in a cell plotting his revenge, and enemies circled like wolves waiting for weakness. But in this room, in this moment, they had something Wolf could never understand. They had each other, and that made them unbreakable. The door burst open. Captain Thorne stood there, her expression grim. We have a problem, she said. Wolf's allies are mobilizing. There's a riot forming outside the courthouse. They're demanding his release. And, she paused, there's been an explosion at the magistrate's hall. 2 of the 3 judges who presided today are dead. The words hit like a physical blow. Lyra felt Kale go rigid beside her. And the 3rd? He asked. Alive but missing, Thorne said. Someone took her. We're assuming it was Wolf's people. Kale's expression turned murderous. He's trying to force a mistrial. Without the magistrates, the case falls apart. Not if we find her, Lyra said. Not if we stop whoever's doing this. This is exactly what I was afraid of, Kyle said. Wolf's people are burning the city down to free him, and they won't stop until we stop them, Lyra finished. So what are we waiting for? Kyle looked at her, then at Thorne, then back at Lyra. She saw the moment he made his decision. Captain, mobilize every soldier we have, he said. Find that magistrate, and lock down every entrance to the jail where Wolf is being held. If his allies want him free, they'll have to go through us. Yes, sir, Thorne said, and vanished. Kale turned to Lyra. You stay here, behind locked doors, with guards. No, Lyra said. I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. It's already dangerous, Lyra interrupted. Hiding didn't save me. Running didn't save me. The only thing that's kept me alive is facing this head on. So I'm coming with you, and we're going to end this, tonight. Kale opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He studied her face, seeing the determination there, the absolute refusal to back down. Finally, he nodded. Then stay close to me, and if I tell you to run, you run. Understood? Understood, Lyra said. They armed themselves, Kael with his sword and pistol, Lyra with a knife and her stubborn refusal to hide anymore. Then they stepped out into a city that had turned into a battlefield. And somewhere in the chaos, a missing magistrate was running out of time. The capital's streets had transformed into chaos. Fires burned in 3 different districts, their orange glow staining the night sky. Rioters clashed with city guards at intersections, and the air smelled of smoke and blood and rage. Kyle moved through it all like a force of nature, his soldiers flanking him in tight formation. Lyra kept pace beside him, her hand on the knife at her belt, her eyes scanning every shadow for threats. The magistrate's last known location was her residence in the noble quarter, Captain Thorne said, jogging up to match their stride. But the house was destroyed in the explosion. If she survived, whoever took her would have needed a secure location to hold her, somewhere defendable. Wolf's estate, Lyra said suddenly. It's the only place that makes sense. His people control it, it's fortified, and it's close enough to the courthouse that they could have moved her there quickly. Kael's expression darkened. It's also a trap. They'll be expecting us. Then we don't disappoint them, Lyra said. They changed course, heading toward the eastern edge of the noble quarter where Wolf's estate sprawled across several acres of manicured grounds. As they approached, the chaos of the riots faded, replaced by an eerie quiet. The wealthy had barricaded themselves in their homes, leaving the streets empty and dark. Wolf's estate loomed ahead, a massive structure of white stone and iron gates, beautiful and imposing in equal measure. Guards patrolled the walls, more than usual, all heavily armed. Kyle called a halt 2 blocks away, gathering his commanders in the shadow of an abandoned merchant building. Direct assault is suicide, one of his captains said. They'll see us coming from half a mile away. We don't have time for a siege, Kyle countered. Every hour we wait is another hour that magistrate might be dead. Then we don't wait, Lyra said. All eyes turned to her. And we don't assault. We walk in through the front door. Explain, Kyle said. Lyra's mind raced, piecing together a plan that was either brilliant or insane. Wolf's people think I'm a coward. Someone who ran for 3 years, who only testified because you forced me to. They don't see me as a threat, so we use that. Use it how? Captain Thorne asked, skeptical. I go to the gate, Lyra said. Alone. I tell them I want to make a deal, my testimony in exchange for the magistrate's life. They'll think I'm breaking, that I'm trying to save myself. They'll bring me inside. Absolutely not, Kale said immediately. You're not walking into that estate alone. I won't be alone, Lyra said. Once I'm inside, I create a distraction, something that draws guards away from wherever they're holding the magistrate. And while they're focused on me, your soldiers breach the walls and find her. That's not a plan, Kale said. That's suicide with extra steps. It's the only way to get inside without them killing the magistrate the moment they see us coming, Lyra argued. If we attack, she's dead. If we negotiate from outside, she's dead. But if I'm inside, if I can buy us even 10 minutes... She's right, Captain Thorne said reluctantly. It's risky, but it might work. Kael looked like he wanted to argue, but the logical part of him, the tactical commander who'd won a dozen wars, knew they were right. He turned away, his hands clenched into fists, before finally speaking. You get 5 minutes, he said, his voice rough. 5 minutes to get inside and signal us. Then we're coming in whether you're ready or not. How do I signal? Lyra asked. Kael pulled something from his coat, a small glass vial filled with powder that glowed faintly in the darkness. Alchemical fire. Break this anywhere inside the estate and it'll create a flash bright enough to see from outside. That's our signal to move. Lyra took the vial, tucking it carefully into her coat. And if something goes wrong? Then I burn that estate to the ground, Kael said flatly, and kill everyone inside until I find you. The words should have been frightening. Instead, Lyra found them oddly comforting. Kael pulled her aside away from the others. In the shadows between buildings, with the distant glow of fires painting his features in stark relief, he looked almost vulnerable. This is insane, he said quietly. You know that, right? Completely, Lyra agreed. And you're still doing it. I have to. That magistrate is in there because of me, because she tried to give me justice. I can't let her die for that. Kael's jaw tightened. If you die in there, I'll... He stopped, the words catching. You'll what? Lyra asked softly. Instead of answering, Kael reached into his coat and pulled out something small and silver. Lyra's necklace, the one he'd given back to her in Black Hollow. I thought you should have this, he said, for luck. But Lyra shook her head. Keep it, Consider it collateral. I'll come back for it. Cale stared at her, then slowly closed his fist around the necklace. You'd better. For a moment they stood in silence, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. Then Lyra did something she'd been wanting to do for weeks. She reached up and pulled Cale down into a fierce, desperate kiss. It lasted only seconds, but it said everything they hadn't had time to say. When they broke apart, Cale's expression was raw with emotion. Come back to me, he said. I will, Lyra promised. She turned and walked toward Wolf's estate before her courage could fail her. The guards at the gate tensed as she approached, weapons rising. Lyra raised her hands, showing she was unarmed. I need to speak with whoever's in charge, she called out. Tell them Lyra Hale wants to make a deal. The guards exchanged glances. One of them disappeared inside while the others kept their weapons trained on her. Minutes passed. Lyra forced herself to stand still, to appear frightened and desperate rather than determined. Finally, the gate opened. A man emerged, middle-aged, well-dressed, with the calculating eyes of someone who'd spent years in Wolf's service. Miss Hale, he said, I'm Marcus Vale, Lord Wolf's chief steward. I'm told you wish to negotiate? I want this to end, Lyra said, letting her voice shake. The riots, the violence, all of it. I never wanted any of this. I want to go back to my life. An admirable sentiment, Vale said, his tone suggesting he didn't believe a word. But you've already testified. The damage is done. Not if I recant, Lyra said. Not if I tell the courts I was mistaken, that I was coerced into testifying. Without my statement, the case falls apart. Wolf goes free. Vale studied her carefully. And what do you want in return? Safe passage out of the kingdom, Lyra said. Enough money to start over somewhere far away. And you release the magistrate unharmed. Those are my terms. You're hardly in a position to make demands, Vale said. Neither are you, Lyra countered. Every hour Wolf spends in custody, more evidence surfaces. More of his allies distance themselves. The longer this drags on, the more likely he actually faces consequences. But if I recant now, today, it all goes away. He's free by morning. Vale considered this. Lyra could see him calculating, weighing the value of her offer against the risk of letting her inside the estate. Very well, he said finally. But you'll be searched, and if this is a trick, you'll die slowly. Understood, Lyra said. They brought her inside. Guards patted her down thoroughly, finding and confiscating her knife, but missing the small vial of alchemical fire she'd hidden in the lining of her boot. They led her through opulent hallways decorated with artwork and expensive furnishings, the trappings of wealth built on blood and corruption. Vale brought her to a study where more of Wolf's people waited, lawyers, guards, various officials who'd been bought or intimidated into loyalty. She claims she wants to recant, Vale announced. In exchange for what? One of the lawyers asked. Money and freedom, Vale said. And the magistrate's release. The magistrate is our insurance, another man said. We can't just let her go. You can if it means saving your employer, Lyra said. Or you can keep her and watch Wolf hang. Your choice. Bold words for someone surrounded by enemies, Vale said. I'm not your enemy, Lyra said. I never was. I was just someone in the wrong place at the wrong time. Let me fix this mistake and we all walk away. The men conferred in low voices. Lyra used the time to scan the room, looking for anything she could use. The study had 2 doors, one she'd entered through, one leading deeper into the estate. Guards flanked both. Windows overlooked the grounds, where she could see more patrols moving in the darkness. Kyle and his soldiers were out there somewhere, waiting for her signal. We'll need a signed statement, one of the lawyers said finally. A formal recantation, witnessed and sealed. Fine, Lyra said, but I see the magistrate first. I need to know she's alive. Vale nodded to one of the guards. Bring her. They waited in tense silence. Minutes ticked past. Finally, the door opened and 2 guards dragged in a woman in torn judicial robes. Magistrate Helena Cross, the head judge from the hearing. She was bruised, bloodied, but alive and conscious. Magistrate Cross? Lyra said, moving toward her. The guards blocked her path. No closer. Cross raised her head, her eyes finding Lyra's. Despite her condition, there was fierce intelligence in that gaze. and recognition. She knew Lyra shouldn't be here. She knew something was happening. "They want me to recant my testimony," Lyra said, speaking directly to Cross. "To say I was wrong about what I saw. In exchange, they'll let you go." "Don't," Cross said hoarsely. "Don't let them—" One of the guards struck her. "Quiet." Rage flared in Lyra's chest, but she forced it down. "Where do I sign?" Vale produced a document, placing it on the desk. "Read it carefully. Once signed, there's no going back." Lyra pretended to read, her mind racing. She needed to create a distraction, something big enough to pull guards away from Cross and give Kael's soldiers time to breach the walls. But what? Then she saw it. On the desk, among the papers and seals, was an oil lamp burning with a bright flame. "I need a pen," she said. Vale handed her one. Lyra bent over the document, angling her body so she blocked their view of her hands. With her left hand, she signed the first line. With her right, she pulled the vial of alchemical fire from her boot. "There," she said, straightening. "First section done. But before I continue," she turned, holding up the vial so they could all see it. "I want you to know that I lied." Vale's expression darkened. "What?" "I lied about wanting to recant," Lyra said. "I lied about being scared, and I definitely lied about being alone." She threw the vial at the oil lamp. The explosion of light was instantaneous and blinding, bright enough to turn night into day, bright enough to be seen through every window in the estate, bright enough to signal Kyle that it was time to move. Guards shouted, stumbling back from the flash. Lyra didn't waste time. She grabbed the oil lamp and hurled it at the curtains. Fire caught immediately, spreading across the expensive fabric. "Stop her!" Vale screamed. But Lyra was already moving. She threw herself at the guards holding Magistrate Cross, using the chaos and their temporary blindness to her advantage. She got her hands on one guard's sword belt, ripped the weapon free, and swung it in a wild arc that drove the men back. "Can you run?" she asked Cross. "I can try," the magistrate gasped. Lyra hauled her toward the second door, the one leading deeper into the estate. Behind them, guards recovered from the flash and gave chase. Ahead, the hallway was dark and unfamiliar. They ran anyway. Shouts echoed through the estate. Alarms rang out. Lyra could hear the sounds of combat erupting from outside. Kael's soldiers hitting the walls, just as planned. "Left," Cross gasped. "There's a servant's passage, leads to the kitchen." They turned left, then right, then down a narrow stairwell. Lyra's borrowed sword felt awkward in her hand, but she kept it ready. Footsteps pounded behind them, getting closer. They burst into the kitchen, a vast room of cold ovens and prep tables. The servants had fled, leaving it empty. Lyra spotted a door leading outside and made for it. A guard appeared in their path, sword raised. Lyra didn't hesitate. She threw herself forward in a clumsy attack that caught the man off guard. They collided, tumbling to the floor. The guard was stronger, better trained, but Lyra fought with desperate fury. She got her knee into his gut, drove an elbow into his face, and when he loosened his grip, she grabbed a cast-iron pan from the counter and brought it down on his skull with sickening force. He went limp. Lyra scrambled up, breathing hard. "Remind me never to cross you," Cross said weakly. They made it outside into the estate's gardens. The manicured grounds had become a battlefield. Kael's soldiers had breached the walls in 3 places, engaging Wolf's guards in vicious close combat. Fire spread from the study, casting everything in hellish light. And there, in the center of it all, Lyra saw Kael. He moved through the combat like a storm, his sword a blur of lethal precision. 3 guards lay dead at his feet, and 2 more backed away, fear clear in their eyes. When Kael saw Lyra, relief and fury warred in his expression. "Get the magistrate to safety!" he shouted, cutting down another attacker. Captain Thorne appeared at Lyra's side, 2 soldiers with her. "This way. We've secured a route to the gates." They moved quickly, half carrying Cross between them. Behind them, the battle raged. Lyra wanted to stay, to help, to make sure Kael was safe. But getting Cross out alive was the priority. Everything else depended on keeping the magistrate alive to testify. They reached the gates just as a section of the estate's roof collapsed in flames. The intense heat drove everyone back, friend and enemy alike. Through the chaos, Lyra saw Kael's soldiers systematically subduing Wolf's guards. Not killing unnecessarily, but neutralizing threats with brutal efficiency. This was what real power looked like. Not threats or intimidation, but decisive action backed by skill and loyalty. The magistrate needs medical attention, Captain Thorne said, commandeering a horse. I'm taking her to the courthouse. It's the most secure location now. I'm going with you, Lyra said. No, a voice said behind her. Kael emerged from the smoke, soot-streaked and bloodied, but alive. You're coming with me. We're ending this tonight. Ending what? Lyra asked. Wolf's empire, Kael said. His expression was grim determination carved from stone. While his people were busy here, my men raided his warehouses, his offices, his associates' homes. We've seized his financial records, his correspondence, evidence of every crime he's committed for the past decade. Bribery, smuggling, extortion, murder. All of it. He pulled out a Thussic ledger, its pages filled with meticulous notes in Wolf's own hand. This is his personal accounting book. Every illegal deal, every paid-off official, every threat he's made. It's all here. Lyra stared at the ledger, understanding dawning. You've been planning this, the whole time. The moment you agreed to testify, I knew we'd need more than just your word, Kael said. So I started building a case, gathering evidence, tracking down witnesses, following the money. Your testimony was the key that opened the door. But this, he held up the ledger, this is what brings the whole structure down. Take it to the courthouse, Magistrate Cross said from her horse, her voice stronger now. I'll reconvene the hearing tomorrow. With that evidence and my testimony about tonight's abduction, Wolf won't just face trial for murder. He'll face justice for everything. Kael nodded. Captain Thorne, get her to safety. Double guards, triple check everyone. If anything happens to her now, nothing will, Thorne said firmly. She rode off, the magistrate secure behind her, surrounded by soldiers. Kael turned to Lyra. There's something else. Come with me. He led her through the estate's grounds to a smaller building that had escaped the fire, Wolf's personal office. Inside, shelves lined the walls, filled with documents and artifacts. But Kael went straight to the desk, pulling open a locked drawer with a key his men must have found. Inside was a collection of letters tied with black ribbon. What are those? Lyra asked. Correspondence between Wolf and his associates, Kael said, untying the ribbon, including several exchanges about you. He handed her one of the letters. Lyra read it, her blood running cold. The letter detailed Wolf's orders to track her down, listing the towns she'd hidden in, the names she'd used. He'd known where she was for over a year, but he'd held back, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He was hunting you like a game, Kael said quietly. Playing with you. He could have killed you at any time, but he wanted you to suffer first, to live in fear. Rage and horror twisted in Lyra's gut. A year. She'd spent a year looking over her shoulder, running from shadows, and all the while Wolf had been watching, savoring her terror. But he made a mistake, Kael continued. He underestimated you. He thought fear would keep you silent forever. He didn't count on you finding the courage to fight back. Lyra set down the letter, her hands steady despite the emotions churning inside her. What happens now? Now we make sure every person in this kingdom knows what Casimir Wolf really is, Kael said. Tomorrow, when the hearing reconvenes, we present everything. Your testimony, the magistrate's account, this evidence. We don't just prove he's guilty. We expose the entire system that let him operate for so long. That's going to make you enemies, Lyra said. Powerful people who benefited from Wolf's crimes won't want their involvement revealed. Let them try to stop me, Kael said. His expression was dangerous, unyielding. I've spent 3 years building my strength for exactly this moment. Anyone who stands with Wolf can fall with him. They spent the next hour securing the estate, collecting evidence, taking statements from captured guards who were suddenly very willing to testify against their former employer. By the time they were done, the sun was rising over a city that had burned and bled but survived the night. Kael's soldiers escorted them back to their quarters. Lyra was exhausted, running on adrenaline and determination, but her mind was too wired to sleep. You should rest, Kael said as they reached her rooms. Tomorrow is going to be, I know, Lyra interrupted, the most important day of my life. Again. She managed a tired smile. I'm starting to collect those. Kyle's expression softened. You were incredible tonight. The way you walked into that estate, the way you saved the magistrate. That took courage I'm not sure I could have managed. You've been managing it for years, Lyra said. Standing up to corruption, fighting for justice even when it's dangerous. You just make it look easy. It's not easy, Kyle admitted. It's exhausting and terrifying, and sometimes I wonder if it's worth it. But then I meet someone like you, someone who refuses to stay down no matter how many times they're knocked over, and I remember why I started fighting in the first place. They stood in the doorway, neither quite willing to say goodnight. The early morning light painted everything in soft gold, making the moment feel suspended, separate from the chaos surrounding them. Your necklace, Lyra said. Do you still have it? Cale reached into his coat and pulled it out. Lyra took it, but instead of putting it on, she fastened it around Kael's neck. Keep it a little longer, she said, until this is really over. Consider it a promise that I'm not going anywhere. Kael's hand closed over the pendant, his expression unreadable. And when it is over, when Wolf is convicted and you're finally free, then I get my necklace back, Lyra said softly. And we figure out what comes next, together. The word hung between them, full of possibility. Before either could say more, Captain Thorne appeared, her expression urgent. The courthouse just sent word, she said. The hearing's been moved up. They want to reconvene in 3 hours, not tomorrow. The magistrate says they need to move quickly before Wolf's allies can regroup. Cale swore. 3 hours? We're not ready? We're as ready as we'll ever be, Lyra said. She felt that familiar determination settling over her, the same feeling that had carried her through 3 years of running and brought her here to face her demons. Let's finish this. The courthouse was even more packed than before. Word had spread about the night's events, the rescue, the evidence, the fire at Wolf's estate. The entire city seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Lyra walked through the crowds with Kael beside her, flanked by soldiers, but this time she didn't shrink from the stares. She met them head-on, chin lifted, shoulders back. She was done being afraid. Inside the chamber, the atmosphere was electric. Magistrate Cross sat at the bench, bandaged but resolute, flanked by 2 replacement judges who'd been brought in overnight. Wolf sat in chains at the defendant's table, his expensive clothes rumpled, his aristocratic composure shattered. When he saw Lyra, pure hatred burned in his eyes. This court is now in session, Magistrate Cross announced. Her voice was hoarse but strong. We are here to determine if sufficient evidence exists to proceed with a full trial against Lord Casimir Wolf on charges of murder, conspiracy, kidnapping, and obstruction of justice. Kael's legal team presented first. They laid out the case methodically. Lyra's testimony, the physical evidence from the murder scene, the correspondence proving Wolf had tracked her, the records of bribes and threats, the accounting ledger detailing decades of crimes. Then Magistrate Cross herself testified about her abduction, describing in clinical detail how Wolf's men had destroyed her home, threatened her family, and held her prisoner to prevent the hearing from proceeding. With each piece of evidence, with each testimony, Lyra watched Wolf's facade crumble. His lawyers tried to object, to discredit, to delay, but the weight of proof was overwhelming. Finally, it was Lyra's turn to speak again. She stood at the witness platform, looking out over the packed chamber, and began. 3 years ago, I witnessed a murder, and I ran because I was afraid. Afraid of dying, afraid of what would happen to my family, afraid of standing up to power. She paused, meeting Wolf's eyes across the room. But fear is what men like Casimir Wolf count on. They build their empires on intimidation and silence, on the belief that people like me will always choose safety over truth. Her voice grew stronger. Well, I'm done being silent. I'm done being afraid. And I'm done letting men like him control my life. She turned to the magistrates. I saw Casimir Wolf murder Brennan Ashford in cold blood. I saw him shoot an unarmed man 3 times. And I'm here, under oath, to make sure everyone knows what he is. Not a lord, not a powerful figure, just a killer who thought he was above consequences. The chamber erupted in murmurs. Magistrate Cross called for order. Does the defense have any rebuttal? She asked. Wolf's lead attorney stood, but before he could speak, Wolf himself rose. This is a farce, he said, his voice dripping with contempt. You're all fools if you think this changes anything. I have allies in the highest reaches of this kingdom. I have resources you can't imagine. Even if you convict me, You'll what? Magistrate Cross interrupted. Threaten us? Bribe more officials? Send more assassins? She leaned forward. Your threats no longer have power here, Lord Wolf. The people you've intimidated have found their courage. The officials you've bought have been exposed, and your resources are being seized even as we speak. She looked to her fellow judges. I believe we have sufficient evidence to proceed. All in favor of moving to a full trial? All three judges raised their hands. Then it is so ordered, Cross said. Casimir Wolf will stand trial for murder, conspiracy, kidnapping, bribery, extortion, and numerous other crimes against the kingdom. The trial will begin in 1 week, giving both sides time to prepare their cases. Until then, the defendant will remain in custody with no possibility of release. She brought down her gavel. This hearing is adjourned. The chamber exploded in noise, some cheering, some protesting, everyone talking at once. Wolf was dragged away, still hurling threats and promises of revenge. But his words had lost their power. He was just a man in chains now, facing justice for the first time in his life. Lyra stood on the witness platform, watching him go, and felt something inside her shift. The fear that had controlled her for 3 years, the constant dread, the paranoia, the suffocating weight of terror began to lift. She'd done it. She'd faced her nightmare and survived. More than survived. She'd won. Kael appeared at her side, offering his hand to help her down from the platform. You were magnificent, he said quietly. We were magnificent, Lyra corrected. None of this happens without you. And none of it matters without you, Kael said. You're the one who had the courage to come forward. You're the one who stood up when everyone else stayed silent. They made their way through the crowd, which parted for them now with a mixture of awe and respect. People called out to Lyra, thanking her, praising her courage, some just wanting to touch her hand as she passed. It was overwhelming and humbling and strange. For 3 years, she'd been invisible, forgettable, desperate to be overlooked. Now she was the center of attention, and she wasn't sure how to feel about it. Outside the courthouse, the morning sun broke through the clouds. The city was battered and scarred from the night's violence, but it was standing, surviving, moving forward, just like her. What happens now? Lyra asked as they stood on the courthouse steps looking out over the city. Now we prepare for the trial, Kael said. Make sure the case is airtight, that every piece of evidence is documented, that Wolf's allies can't interfere. That's not what I meant, Lyra said. She turned to face him. I meant what happens with us. After the trial, when this is all over? Kael was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he reached up and unclasped the necklace from around his neck. Her necklace. The one she'd given him to hold. I think, he said slowly, that depends on what you want. You've spent 3 years running, surviving, just trying to stay alive. Once Wolf is convicted, once you're truly free, what do you want your life to look like? It was a question Lyra had been afraid to ask herself. For so long, survival had been the only goal. She'd never let herself think beyond the next town, the next false identity, the next escape. But now, standing here with Kael, with justice finally within reach, she let herself imagine a future, a real one. I want to stay, she said. The words surprised her even as she spoke them, but they felt right. I want to stop running. I want to build something real, something that matters, and I want... She hesitated, then pushed forward. I want to do it with you. Kael's expression transformed. The stern warlord facade dropped away, leaving something raw and honest and full of hope. Then stay, he said simply. He held out the necklace. Stay, and let's build something together. Lyra took the necklace, fastening it around her own neck this time. The weight of it felt different now, not a reminder of what she'd lost, but a symbol of what she'd found. Courage, purpose, home. And standing there on the courthouse steps, with the city spread before them and the promise of justice finally within reach, Lyra Hale, the woman who'd refused to be found, chose to be seen. She chose to stay. She chose to fight. And for the first time in 3 years, she chose to believe that tomorrow could be better than today. The trial was still ahead. Wolf still had allies, still had resources, still posed a threat. But Lyra wasn't afraid anymore. Because she'd learned something essential over these past weeks, something that no amount of running had taught her. Real strength wasn't about avoiding danger, it was about facing it head on and refusing to back down. And she was done backing down. The week before the trial moved with brutal efficiency. Kael's legal team worked around the clock, organizing evidence, preparing witnesses, anticipating every possible defense strategy Wolf's attorneys might employ. Lara spent hours each day in preparation sessions, her testimony being refined and strengthened until she could recount every detail of that night without hesitation. But beneath the legal machinery, something else was building. The city itself was changing. News of Wolf's crimes had spread like wildfire through every district, every tavern, every market square. The accounting ledger, now called the Book of Blood by the press, detailed not just murders and bribes, but the systematic corruption that had poisoned the kingdom for decades. Names of other nobles, officials, and merchants appeared in those pages, and suddenly people who'd thought themselves untouchable were facing scrutiny. Some fled, others tried to cover their tracks. A few, very few, came forward voluntarily, offering testimony in exchange for leniency. The kingdom was purging itself, and Lyra had lit the match. On the third day of preparation, Captain Thorne brought unexpected news. "There are people outside asking to see you," she said, her expression somewhere between bemused and impressed. "A lot of people." Lyra looked up from the documents she'd been reviewing. "What do you mean, a lot?" "See for yourself," Thorne said, gesturing to the window. Lyra crossed to it and looked down at the street below. Her breath caught. Hundreds of people filled the square outside their secured building. They weren't rioting or protesting. They were simply standing there, many holding candles, some with hand-painted signs. The messages varied, but the theme was consistent: justice for the silent. Courage inspires courage. "We stand with Lyra Hale." "They've been gathering since dawn," Thorne said. "Merchants who were extorted by Wolf's network, families who lost loved ones to his violence, people who were too afraid to speak up but feel brave enough now because of what you did." Lyra felt tears burning behind her eyes. She'd thought she was fighting alone, or at best with Kael's support. She hadn't realized how many others had been waiting for someone to take the first step. "They want to testify," Thorne continued. "We've had over 50 people come forward in the past 2 days alone, all with stories about Wolf or his associates. The prosecution's case gets stronger every hour." Kael appeared in the doorway, having overheard. "The magistrates want to expand the trial," he said. "Make it about more than just Brennan's murder. They're talking about charging Wolf with racketeering, systematic corruption, conspiracy to commit multiple murders." He moved to stand beside Lyra at the window. "You didn't just give them one case. You gave them the opportunity to clean out decades of rot." "I just told the truth," Lyra said quietly. "Sometimes that's all it takes," Kael said. "One person willing to stand up and say what everyone else was too afraid to say." That evening, Lyra did something she hadn't done in 3 years. She went outside without disguise, without fear, and met with the people who'd gathered. Kael insisted on security, but he let her walk among the crowd, listening to their stories, accepting their gratitude, offering whatever comfort she could. An elderly woman clasped Lyra's hands, tears streaming down her face. "My son spoke out against Wolf's business practices. They found him in the river 3 days later. They said it was an accident, but I knew. I always knew." She squeezed Lyra's fingers. "Thank you for giving him justice. Thank you for being brave enough." A young merchant showed Lyra scars from a beating he'd received when he refused to pay Wolf's protection money. "I thought I'd take this shame to my grave," he said, "but seeing you stand up made me realize the shame isn't ours, it's theirs." Story after story, each one a piece of the larger pattern of fear and corruption Wolf had woven through the kingdom. And with each testimony Lyra heard, her resolve strengthened. This wasn't just about Brennan anymore. It was about everyone Wolf had hurt, everyone he'd silenced, everyone who'd lived in fear of his power. The trial began on a clear morning exactly 1 week after the preliminary hearing. The courthouse had been expanded to accommodate the unprecedented number of witnesses and spectators. Every seat was filled, with hundreds more gathered outside, unable to get in but unwilling to miss this moment of history. Lyra sat in the front row of the witness section, flanked by Captain Thorne and 2 other guards. Across the aisle sat Wolf, his chains replaced with formal restraints that were slightly more dignified but no less secure. His legal team, reduced now, as several of his attorneys had abandoned him when the extent of his crimes became public, looked grim but determined. The three magistrates entered, led by Helena Cross. Her injuries had healed enough that she could preside, and she'd refused to recuse herself despite defense motions claiming bias. "The evidence speaks for itself," she'd said in a pre-trial hearing. "My personal experience only reinforces what the facts already prove." The trial lasted 6 days. The prosecution built their case methodically, calling witness after witness. Lyra testified on the second day, recounting in precise detail the night she witnessed Brennan's murder. Wolf's attorneys tried to discredit her, but 3 years of preparation and the weight of corroborating evidence made their attacks fall flat. On the third day, forensic experts testified about the murder scene, matching the bullets that killed Brennan to a pistol found in Wolf's personal collection. On the fourth day, accountants walked through the ledger, explaining how Wolf had built his fortune on extortion and illegal trade. The fifth day brought the most damning testimony: former associates of Wolf, who'd agreed to testify in exchange for reduced sentences. They described his methods in chilling detail: the threats, the violence, the careful cultivation of fear that kept his victims silent. One former business partner described how Wolf had ordered the execution of a rival merchant's entire family, including children, to send a message about loyalty. Another detailed the network of corrupt officials Wolf maintained, showing how he'd essentially bought himself immunity from prosecution for years. Through it all, Wolf sat in stony silence, his expression revealing nothing. But Lyra could see the cracks forming, the way his hands occasionally clenched, the muscle ticking in his jaw. The careful mask he wore was slipping. On the sixth day, the defense finally presented their case. It was weak. A few character witnesses who vouched for Wolf's public charity work, attempts to discredit the forensic evidence, suggestions that the former associates were lying to save themselves. But they had one surprise left. Wolf himself took the stand. "This is a mistake," Cale muttered from where he sat beside Lyra. "His lawyers must have fought against this." Wolf raised his right hand and swore to tell the truth. Then he turned to the packed courtroom and began to speak. "I am not a perfect man," he said, his voice carrying across the chamber. "I've made business decisions that, in hindsight, I regret. I've been ruthless in my dealings, perhaps too ruthless at times. But I am not a murderer." He looked directly at Lyra. "Miss Hale seems very certain of what she saw that night, but I submit to this court that she is mistaken. Yes, I knew Brennan Ashford. Yes, we had business disputes, but I did not kill him. I was not even in the capital that night. I was at my country estate, which my staff can confirm." "Your staff who are paid by you?" the prosecutor interrupted. "Who depend on you for their livelihoods?" "My staff who have no reason to lie," Wolf countered, "unlike Miss Hale, who stands to gain fame and possibly financial reward from her testimony." Lyra felt Cale tense beside her, but she placed a hand on his arm. "Let him talk," she whispered. "He's making it worse." And he was. With every word, Wolf revealed the arrogance that had allowed him to operate with impunity for so long. He couldn't help but defend himself with superiority, to speak to the court as if they were beneath him, to suggest that their judgment didn't matter because he was untouchable. The prosecutor let him ramble for nearly an hour before beginning cross-examination. "Lord Wolf, you say you weren't in the capital the night of Brennan Ashford's murder, yet we have testimony from 3 separate witnesses who saw you at your townhouse that evening." "They're mistaken," Wolf said. "We have records showing your carriage was signed out of your country estate stables 2 days before the murder and returned the day after." "My staff could have used it," Wolf said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. "We have a letter, written in your hand, sent to Brennan Ashford the morning of his death, demanding a meeting that night in the Merchant Quarter, the same location where he was killed." Wolf's facade cracked. "That letter could have been forged. We had it authenticated by 3 independent experts. It's your handwriting, your seal, your signature." The prosecutor held up the letter. "You called him to that alley, and then you killed him when he refused to cooperate with your illegal activities." "That's a lie," Wolf shouted, rising from his seat. "You're all lying. This entire trial is a conspiracy against me, orchestrated by the sovereign because he wants revenge for his cousin's death." "Sit down, Lord Wolf," Magistrate Cross said coldly. "I will not." Wolf's composure shattered completely. "I am a lord of this realm. I have rights. I have power. You cannot do this to me." Your power, Cross said, her voice cutting through his outburst, comes from the same system of justice you're currently defying, and that power ends the moment you use it to commit murder. Guards moved to restrain Wolf as he continued to rant, his aristocratic mask completely gone, revealing the entitled, violent man beneath. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as he was forcibly returned to his seat, still shouting about conspiracies and persecution. The prosecutor turned to the magistrates. The prosecution rests. The defense, clearly shaken by their client's outburst, declined to call any more witnesses. Closing arguments were scheduled for the following morning. That night, Lyra couldn't sleep. She stood at the window of her quarters, watching the city lights, thinking about how far she'd come. From a terrified witness fleeing into the night to someone who'd helped bring down a corrupt empire. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Captain Thorne poked her head in. "The Sovereign wants to see you," she said, "in the strategy room." Lyra followed her through the quiet hallways. Inside the strategy room, Kael stood alone, looking at the maps and evidence charts that had guided them through the trial. He turned when she entered. "Couldn't sleep either?" Lyra asked. "Too much in my head," Kael admitted. He moved to a side table and poured 2 glasses of wine, handing her one. "Tomorrow the magistrates deliberate. By evening, we should have a verdict." "You think they'll convict?" Lyra asked. "I think it's impossible not to," Kael said. "The evidence is overwhelming. Even Wolf's own testimony condemned him. But," he paused, "even if they convict, even if he spends the rest of his life in prison, it doesn't undo the damage he caused. It doesn't bring Brennan back." Lyra moved to stand beside him. "No, but it stops him from hurting anyone else. And it sends a message that no one is above justice." "You did that," Kael said quietly. "You sent that message. By refusing to stay silent, by standing up when it would have been safer to hide, you changed everything." "We changed everything," Lyra corrected. "I couldn't have done this without you." Kael turned to face her fully. "What happens after? When the verdict comes in and this is finally over?" It was the question they'd been dancing around for days. Lyra took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "I've spent 3 years surviving," she said, "moving from place to place, never putting down roots, never letting myself imagine a future. But these past weeks, working with you, fighting for something that matters, it's shown me what I want." "What do you want?" Kael asked. "I want to stay here," Lyra said, "not as a witness or someone under protection, but as someone building a real life. I want to use what I've learned to help others who are afraid to come forward. I want to make sure what happened to me never happens to anyone else." She met his eyes, "And I want to do it with you. Not because I need protection, but because She hesitated, then pushed forward. "Because somewhere in all this chaos, I fell in love with you." The words hung in the air. Kael's expression shifted through surprise, hope, and something that looked like relief. "I fell in love with you the moment you refused to sign that recantation," he said. "When you threw that alchemical fire and set Wolf's study ablaze because you'd rather burn his empire down than let him win. You were magnificent and terrifying and absolutely fearless." He set down his wine and took her hands. "I've spent my whole life building power through strength and fear, but you showed me that real power comes from courage and truth, and refusing to back down even when the entire world tells you to be quiet." Lyra felt tears on her cheeks, but they were good tears this time. Healing tears. Kael pulled her close, and they stood like that for a long moment, finding comfort in each other's presence. Outside, the city slept. Tomorrow would bring the verdict, and with it the end of this chapter of their lives. But standing here, in Kael's arms, Lyra felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope for the future. The magistrates returned their verdict on the afternoon of the 7th day. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, with guards posted at every entrance to manage the crowd. Lyra sat in her usual seat, Kael beside her, their hands clasped together beneath the rail where no one could see. Wolf was brought in, still defiant, but with an edge of desperation in his eyes. He'd spent the night in his cell and emerged looking haggard, diminished. Magistrate Cross called the court to order. The silence was absolute. "We have reached our decision," she said. "On the charge of murder and the death of Brennan Ashford, we find the defendant, Casimir Wolf, guilty." The courtroom erupted. Cross's gavel came down repeatedly, demanding order. On the charges of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant guilty. On the charges of racketeering, extortion, bribery of public officials, and obstruction of justice, we find the defendant guilty on all counts. Each pronouncement landed like a hammer blow. Wolf's face went from pale to ashen, the reality finally sinking in. The sentence will be handed down tomorrow, Cross continued. But I want to make something clear to everyone in this courtroom and everyone listening beyond these walls. She looked directly at Wolf. For too long, wealth and position have shielded criminals from consequences. For too long, ordinary people have been too afraid to speak truth to power. That ends today. She turned her gaze to Lyra. Because of one woman's courage, because of her refusal to let fear control her life, justice has prevailed, and that is how it should be. That is how it must be if we are to have any hope of a just society. Cross brought down her gavel one final time. This court is adjourned. Guards immediately surrounded Wolf, preparing to take him back to his cell. As they led him past Lyra's seat, he stopped, forcing them to halt. "This isn't over," he said to her, his voice low and venomous. "You've destroyed me, but I'm not the only one. There are others like me, and they'll come for you. You'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder." "No," Lyra said calmly. "I won't, because I'm not afraid of you anymore. And I'm not afraid of them. You taught me that fear is only powerful when you let it control you, and I'm done being controlled." Wolf stared at her, seeing for the first time the woman she'd become, not the terrified witness who'd fled 3 years ago, but someone forged by survival into something unbreakable. "Move him," the guard captain ordered, and Wolf was dragged away, still staring at Lyra as if he couldn't quite believe what had happened. The courtroom began to empty, but Lyra stayed seated, letting the magnitude of what had just happened wash over her. 3 years of running, 3 years of fear, 3 years of living as someone else. All of it had led to this moment, to justice, to freedom, to herself. Kale squeezed her hand. "You did it." "We did it," Lyra corrected, but she was smiling through her tears. Outside, the crowd that had gathered erupted in celebration. People were cheering, crying, embracing strangers. The news spread through the city like wildfire. Casimir Wolf, the untouchable lord, had been found guilty. Justice had won. Over the next few days, the full scope of what they'd accomplished became clear. With Wolf's conviction, investigations opened into every person named in his ledger. 7 more nobles were arrested. Dozens of officials resigned or were removed from office. The entire power structure of the kingdom shifted, corrupt foundations crumbling under the weight of scrutiny. And at the center of it all, Lyra Hale became a symbol, not just of justice, but of the courage to stand against impossible odds. Offers flooded in. Speaking engagements, book deals, political appointments. Everyone wanted a piece of the woman who'd brought down an empire, but Lyra turned most of them down. "I'm not interested in fame," she told Kyle one evening as they reviewed the latest proposals. "I didn't do this to become a public figure." "Then what do you want to do?" Kyle asked. Lyra had been thinking about this question for days. The answer had come to her gradually, like dawn breaking over mountains. "I want to help people like me," she said. "People who've witnessed crimes but are too afraid to come forward. I want to create something, a sanctuary maybe, or a network, where they can find protection and support, where they don't have to face their demons alone." Kael smiled. "That's ambitious." "So is taking down Wolf," Lyra said. "And we managed that." "We did," Kael agreed. "And if you want to build this sanctuary, you'll have my full support, resources, guards, whatever you need." "I want more than your support," Lyra said. She took his hand. "I want you with me, as a partner, not just a protector. Help me build something that outlasts both of us." Kael pulled her close. "There's nothing I'd rather do." 6 months later, Lyra stood in front of a newly constructed building on the edge of the capital. The sign above the door read, "Haven House, Sanctuary for Witnesses and Survivors." It had taken months of planning, construction, and staffing, but it was finally ready. Inside, the building contained secure living quarters, medical facilities, legal aid offices, and training rooms where people could learn self-defense and other survival skills. It was everything Lyra had wished she'd had 3 years ago, when she'd been running scared and alone. The opening ceremony was small, just Lyra, Kael, Captain Thorne, Magistrate Cross, and a handful of the people who'd testified at Wolf's trial. No press, no politicians, no fanfare. Just the people who understood why this place mattered. 3 years ago, I was the most frightened person in the kingdom, Lyra said as they stood in the main hall. I thought survival meant hiding, running, becoming invisible. But I learned that real survival means standing up, speaking out, refusing to let fear dictate your life. She looked at the faces around her, people who'd found their own courage, who'd spoken their own truths. This place exists because I know what it's like to be terrified and alone. And I never want anyone to feel that way again. So Haven House is more than just a building. It's a promise. A promise that if you find the courage to come forward, you won't face the darkness alone. The applause was heartfelt. After the ceremony, people began to arrive. The first residents of Haven House, people who'd witnessed crimes or survived violence and needed a safe place to rebuild. Lyra greeted each one personally, sharing her own story, offering hope that they could survive this too. That evening, after the last resident had been settled in, Lyra and Kale walked through the city streets. It was the first time Lyra had done so without guards or disguise in 3 years. She wore her own face, used her own name, walked without fear. "How does it feel?" Kale asked. "Strange," Lyra admitted, "but good. Like I'm finally living instead of just surviving." They stopped at a bridge overlooking the river, watching the water catch the last light of sunset. This was the same river where Lyra had faked her death 3 years ago, where she'd tried to erase herself to stay safe. Now she stood here alive, free, and unafraid. "I've been thinking," Kyle said, breaking the comfortable silence, "about what comes next for me. I've spent years building power, fighting battles, ruling through strength. But watching you create Haven House, seeing how you're changing lives through compassion instead of force, it's made me question my methods." He turned to face her. "I want to do better, be better, use my authority to protect people, not just command them, and I'd like your help figuring out how." Lyra smiled. "I think we can help each other. You teach me how to navigate power and politics. I'll teach you that strength doesn't always look like a sword." "Deal," Kyle said. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out something small and wrapped in cloth. "I have something for you. I was going to wait, but I think now is the right moment." He unwrapped the cloth to reveal a ring, simple silver with a small sapphire, beautiful but not ostentatious. "This isn't a political alliance or a strategic marriage," Kyle said. "This is me asking the woman I love if she'll spend her life building something better with me. Not as my subject or my protected witness, but as my equal, my partner, my everything." Lyra felt tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling wider than she had in years. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Kale slipped the ring onto her finger, and they kissed on that bridge over the river where Lyra had once tried to disappear. But she wasn't disappearing anymore. She was shining, bright and unafraid, exactly as she was meant to be. 1 year after Wolf's conviction, Lyra stood before the High Council as they honored her with the kingdom's highest civilian award, the Star of Justice. The ceremony was massive, attended by nobles, officials, and hundreds of ordinary citizens who'd been inspired by her courage. "Lyra Hale," the High Chancellor announced, "for extraordinary bravery in the face of mortal danger, for refusing to let injustice stand, and for inspiring countless others to find their own courage. The kingdom bestows upon you this honor." As they placed the medal around her neck, the crowd rose in thunderous applause. But Lyra's eyes found Kyle in the audience, and in his expression she saw something worth more than any medal: pride, love, and partnership. After the ceremony, as they walked back to Haven House, which had expanded to include 3 additional buildings and served over 100 people, Lyra reflected on how much had changed. Wolf was serving 5 consecutive life sentences in the kingdom's most secure prison. His empire had been dismantled, his assets seized and redistributed to his victims. Dozens of corrupt officials had been removed from power, replaced by people who actually cared about justice. And Lyra, the woman who'd spent 3 years running, had become the voice for everyone who'd been too afraid to speak. But the most important change was internal. Lyra no longer defined herself by her fear. She'd learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear make your decisions. Haven House had helped over 300 people in its first year. Witnesses to crimes, survivors of violence, anyone who needed sanctuary while finding their courage. Some stayed for weeks, others for months, but every single one left stronger than they'd arrived. And Lyra was there for all of them, sharing her story, offering guidance, proving through her mere existence that survival was possible, that justice was possible, that fighting back was possible. On the first anniversary of Wolf's conviction, Lyra and Kyle were married in a simple ceremony in Haven House's courtyard. No grand cathedral, no political spectacle, just the people who mattered most, the residents of Haven House, the soldiers who'd protected her, the magistrates who'd delivered justice, and the few family members Lyra had finally allowed back into her life. Her mother and brother, who'd been living under protection for over a year, stood in the front row, tears streaming down their faces. Lyra had reunited with them 6 months earlier, finally able to explain why she'd disappeared, why she'd let them believe she was dead. The pain of those lost years couldn't be erased, but they were building something new together, learning to be a family again. As Lyra and Kale exchanged vows, promises to stand together, to build together, to face whatever came next as partners, she felt a completeness she'd never thought possible. She'd spent so long just trying to survive that she'd forgotten what it meant to truly live. Now she knew. Living meant standing up for what was right. It meant refusing to let fear control you. It meant building something that mattered, with people who mattered, in a place where you could finally call home. That night, as fireworks lit up the sky over the Capitol in celebration, Lyra stood on the balcony of their new home, the first permanent residence she'd had in 4 years, and looked out over the city. This place had once been the site of her greatest fear, the city where she'd witnessed murder, where she'd been threatened, where she'd lost everything, but it had also become the place where she'd found her courage, where she'd discovered that one person's truth could topple empires, where she'd learned that running might keep you alive, but standing still and fighting was the only way to truly live. Kale joined her on the balcony, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Any regrets?" he asked. Lyra thought about the question seriously. 3 years of running, months of danger, the fear, the pain, the constant threat of death. If she could go back to that night in the alley, knowing everything that would come after, would she still look out that window? "Not one," she said finally. "Because all of it, every terrifying moment, every sleepless night, every time I thought I couldn't go on, it led me here. To this. To you. To Haven House, and everyone we're helping. To a life that actually means something." She turned in his arms to face him. The woman who ran that night was broken and afraid, but she was also brave enough to witness the truth, and that bravery, however terrified, started everything. "To the woman who refused to be found," Kyle said, raising an imaginary glass. "To the man who found her anyway," Lyra replied with a smile, "and refused to let her run again." They kissed as fireworks continued to explode overhead, painting the sky in brilliant colors. And in that moment, Lyra Hale, once a fugitive, once a victim, once so afraid she tried to disappear, stood tall and unafraid in the center of her own life. She'd learned the hardest lessons, that courage was choosing to act despite fear, that justice required sacrifice, and that the only way to defeat those who ruled through intimidation was to refuse to be intimidated. But she'd also learned the best lessons, that love was possible even after trauma, that communities could heal together, and that one person speaking truth could inspire thousands to find their own voices. Haven House would continue to grow, helping more people every year. The reforms sparked by Wolf's trial would continue to reshape the kingdom's justice system. And Lyra and Kyle would continue to build something beautiful from the ashes of what had been destroyed. Because that was what survivors did. They didn't just survive, they transformed their pain into purpose, their fear into strength, their silence into the loudest voice in the room. And Lyra Hale, the woman who'd once been prey, had become something far more dangerous to those who would abuse power. She'd become a symbol of hope. She'd become unbreakable. She'd become sovereign over her own destiny. And in a kingdom that had once been ruled by fear, she'd proven that courage, real, imperfect, terrified but refusing to quit courage, could change everything. The fireworks faded. The city settled into peaceful sleep, and Lyra stood on her balcony, looking toward tomorrow, no longer running from her past, but walking boldly into her future. She was home. She was safe. She was loved. And she was free.